I'd like to open up the special town council meeting of the Town of Fairfax, Wednesday, December 13th, 2023, and it's about 6:31 p.m. And would everyone join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Could we get a roll call, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mayor.
Please.
Councilmember Ackerman,
Yes. Here.
Councilmember Hellman. Here. Councilmember Cutrano,
Present.
Vice Mayor Blash. Here. And Mayor Kohler,
Here.
all present.
And with that, could I get a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I think we had Councilmember Cutrano. I heard two. But let's go with Vice Mayor Blash for the second. And I'll go ahead and read the land acknowledgement.
Would you like me to do a roll call vote
Oh,
first?
thank you. Thank you for reminding me. I'm out of practice.
Okay. Councilmember Ackerman,
Yes.
Councilmember Hellman. Yes. Councilmember Cutrano,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Blash.
Yes.
And Mayor Kohler.
Yes.
All ayes, motion passes.
Thank you. The Fairfax Town Council acknowledges that we are located on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Miwok people of present-day Marin County. We honor with gratitude the land itself and all of its ancestors, past, present, and emerging. Meeting protocol: the mayor shall maintain order at the meetings. The council and the audience are expected to refrain from using profane language and or ridiculing the character or motives of council members, staff, or members of the public, and to maintain the standards of tolerance and civility. Please turn off all cellular phones or place them in silent mode. The town council will review the agenda at 10 o'clock p.m. to ascertain which items, if any, will be continued to another meeting. Any matter not started by 11:30 p.m. will be continued to an adjourned or regular council meeting unless the council votes to suspend this rule. And there was no closed session, so there's no announcement. So the first item is a proclamation recognizing Michele Gardner for her service to the town of Fairfax. And I'll go ahead and read the proclamation. Town of Fairfax proclamation in honor of Michele Gardner, Fairfax Assistant to the Town Manager / Deputy Town Clerk, 2013 to 2023. Whereas Michele Gardner has served as the Assistant to the Town Manager, Deputy Town Clerk for Fairfax since February 2013 and has served ably, deftly, honorably, and with superior integrity for more than 10.5 years. And whereas Michele was admitted to the State Bar of California on December 16, 1991, has a Bachelor of Arts degree in addition to her Juris Doctorate degree. And whereas Michele has been married many years to her husband, Tony, and they have 2 wonderful children, Jasmine and Andy. And whereas Michele came to us with no prior experience in local government, but with experience as an attorney and coordinating school events and fundraisers. She was hired due to her pleasant disposition and her confidence that she could figure out the job. And whereas who knew, other than Michele, her family and friends, that she was correct, that she not only figured out the job, she has been extraordinary, gaining more skills daily and taking on more responsibilities over time. She has admirably and gracefully managed everything thrown at her. And whereas a quote by President Lyndon Johnson might also fit for the Fairfax Town Clerk position. When the burdens of the presidency seem unusually heavy, I always remind myself it could be worse. I could be a town clerk. LBJ actually said mayor, but I've changed it. Whereas as the assistant to the town manager, deputy town clerk, Michele has successfully addressed numerous complex issues such as leading IT for the town, developing a stellar records management system, and handling virtual meetings, elections, petitions, referenda, initiatives, lawsuits, a gazillion public records requests, the town newsletter, pleasant and at times unpleasant citizenry, public hearings, and town council meetings typically every other week, often lasting until the wee hours of the morning. And whereas Michele did the work of 2 full-time staff for the first 10 years of her service, yet always had time to handhold with council members struggling on forms and other requirements. And whereas Michele led the town's efforts to launch a new website, she researched the best website solution. She coordinated with all department heads on their write-ups and various documents. She coordinated with Camille Exposito on the design and other elements, and they worked to migrate over all parts on a monthly basis. The new website was launched in 2018, increasing the town's transparency and accessibility. And again, through Michele's leadership, it appeared seamless. And whereas during the pandemic, she almost single-handedly learned and established Zoom meetings for the town council meetings, working both behind the scenes and during meetings, somehow making it all appear easy. It was not. And whereas after the pandemic, again, Michele mastered the ability to run hybrid meetings, a combination of Zoom and in-person meetings, ensuring all folks were able to participate despite that there were 30 or more in person and with more on Zoom. And whereas Michele was the glue and steady hand that steered the ship during 2 town manager transitions. And whereas Michele is committed to reversing global warming, riding her ancient broken down bike with its terrible bike seat, covered with plastic bags, time to get a new seat, to and from work and for work errands nearly every day for more than 10 years. And whereas Michele has clearly demonstrated her commitment to an unwavering support for the town of Fairfax, her attention to detail to ensure we are following the laws and regulations is unparalleled. And whereas Michele is respected by the town council, her peers, the citizens of Fairfax, and everyone who has worked with her due to her extraordinary public service, dedication, and conscientiousness. And whereas, to quote Garrett Toy, the prior town manager, Michele has become one of the best town clerks in Marin County and one of the best town clerks I've ever worked with. Our current town manager, Heather Abrams, wholeheartedly seconds these thoughts. And whereas Michele has devoted close to 11 years as assistant to the town manager, deputy town clerk, and has worked countless hours for our town and the community, serving the public with integrity and intelligence. Now, therefore, be it hereby proclaimed that in acknowledgement of her dedication, commitment, exemplary service, and innumerable contributions to the town and to our community, the town of Fairfax thanks Michele Gardner and wishes her success in her future endeavors. We know she will be staying on as elected town clerk for a while. And be it further proclaimed that the town of Fairfax is a much better place because Michele chose to live and work here. And then December 13th, 2023 is hereby proclaimed Michele Gardner Day in the town of Fairfax. Thank you. Thank you, Michele. We have to make sure that we do this right. Okay, you come over here. Where am I going? I'm putting my arm. Wait a minute, I got to take my glasses off.
Oh, I have mine on.
Okay. Thank you. And I want to thank Christine, who worked on framing and getting things together and getting treats. And I think, Heather, did you have something you wanted to present? Oh, not ready. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank the mayor and council for this honor and staff for working with me and being so wonderful. And the people, thank you. I know you've put up with me a lot. Oh, I see some friends too. Okay, thank you.
And I think we'll give an opportunity for the public to say some things before we have the council speak. But I just wanted to mention that I was able to pull this proclamation together with help from Renee Goddard, from Garrett Toy, who threw in a few barbs about who knew. And also just Heather. So you are amazingly deserving, and I'm going to cry. So Michael, you go ahead.
Thank you. I want to really honor Michele, support your proclamation. And as somebody who has sometimes called the town in opposition and demanded little documents and stuff, I can truly tell you that Michele, if I catch her on the phone, has always been there, positive, has always responded to me, has always gotten back to me, and has truly done a wonderful job. And even on a comparative basis with different entities that I interact with, she's been a wonderful person and asset to this town. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Would anybody else like to say anything in the room? Oh, I think we see the illustrious Tony Gardner, who would not give me any information. He was sworn to secrecy to not give me information.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not much for public speaking, but you guys were very lucky to have Michele I'm very lucky to have her as my wife for better reasons than you're lucky to have her as your town clerk. But anyway, I think that, yeah, she's, some of the things that she really brought to this job were, she's really good with people. She was able just to relate to everybody, no matter who they were, and make them feel welcome and happy and heard and all of that. So that was great. And then, of course, she's super organized, which is necessary for that job. And she is super smart. She is got great judgment. She's fair, extremely fair. And a few people have probably seen that side of her, and they might have been upset if she was being, demonstrating that fairness and they wanted something else. But it's all just because of a strong sense of integrity. So, I have, she's wonderful. She's my wife. She's great. So, that's it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. I think we're all going to cry. Thank you, Tony. Anyone else in the room would like to say something? Oh, I see.
I've never done this before. I got to press.
You need to you need to press the button. You need to press the button. You turned it off, and then push it down to your face a little bit. Pull it down. No, you don't have to stand up so tall. Michael will fix it for you. There you go. No, you don't touch it.
Oh, okay. Well, you guys have been very lucky to have Michele. She was a good friend of mine, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of her now that she isn't working so hard for the town, because she's put in many hours, and I know about it, and worked really hard. And I've watched her suffer a little bit too through all of it. And it's you guys, where you guys work hard too, but Michele I feel like she's been one of the ones that's kept it all running. And I think you will miss her, because I know she's done a really good job for the town. So, and she has this great sense of humor, which I don't know if you guys know about, but she really does. She's a great person. Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room want to say anything? If not, we'll go to Zoom. So this is just on the proclamation for Michele Gardner. It's not on other agenda items. Yeah, you got to get back to work.
Excuse me.
You
Okay.
still have a few more weeks.
We have two speakers. The first speaker is Tuna Fish Salin, and you're unmuted now.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm going to miss you. I think a lot of other people were too. I just want to say thank you. I'm really going to miss you. And I'm sorry I know that you didn't want to spill the beans and didn't want people to know, but I'm going to tell everybody that she's leaving because she's going to run for town council. Or she's going to run from it. Anyway, I'll now sing you a little song and do a little dance for you, but you're just going to have to imagine that. And perhaps you'll just, retire to Switzerland where you can just go milk some cows and make cheese or something. But I know that you're running for town council, and I'd vote for you if I could. Run. We'll miss you. Take care.
Thank you, Sarah. Next speaker.
Thank you, Sarah. The next speaker is, Deborah Benson. You're unmuted now.
Hello, Michelle. I am going to miss you terribly. I want to thank you for all the help you've given me and all of the different positions I've, been in over the years. Thank you for being prompt and answering those sometimes voluminous Public Records Act requests. And remembering the last one I came in to present to you when I was trying to get an answer from in another way and couldn't get an answer. And I walked in and you came out and saw what I had in my hand and you went, "Oh no." And then got the answer for me so that I didn't have to go through that. So you've been great. You've been a great help when I had questions about what to do in terms of being on the tree committee. You've just been great, and you've done a great job for Fairfax, and I thank you, and I truly will miss you and hope to run into you on the streets or in the Larkspur Landing place as I did once. And I wish you the best and good times ahead.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah. Are there any more callers on Zoom?
There are no more speakers on Zoom.
Okay. Well, I'd like to open it up to council members, and thanks all. Vice Mayor Blash.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. Michelle, you have just been like the essence of equanimity. You are amazing because you have been so gracious and yet so objective, which of course is a requirement of your role. But I just think it's amazing how well you've done it. And you also live in this town, and yet you've managed to retain that objectivity and fairness through all these years. And that's just been so appreciated by me as both a resident and now as a town council member. And then, of course, we all acknowledge that your skills and experience are so incredibly useful. I really don't know how we'll replace them, although Christine's doing a good job. It's just you've been very special. And so I'm glad I'll still see you around town. And I'm glad you'll get some rest, but I'll really miss you in that position. So thank you so much. And I brought you some flowers and put them on the back table. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hellman.
Yeah, Michelle, I also really, really respect how the objectivity that you've maintained over the past 10 years. There's been many, many issues that have been heated and divided
community, and I'm sure that could not have been easy for you, just knowing how many people in town. And I just really appreciate that about you. And I think you're model, you're a role model in that regard. And professional and respectful always. And your records management, it blows my mind. I particularly appreciate the period of time where we had an interim town manager, and I really just felt like you were both the glue and the gears, and it was just pretty phenomenal. I mean, I know we've stretched you. I know you've been stressed, and I'm just delighted that you can be a regular citizen now and enjoy your town in a new way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Well, Michelle, there have been so many times that I have come into town hall with questions, with confusion, with so many things to try to figure out. And you have not only been completely helpful in every way, above and beyond, but always with a smile, despite the fact that you were overwhelmed and sometimes said so, but nonetheless, you were smiling even as you said so. So for me, it's always been Michele Gardner Day, and I'll miss you so much. But have a good time out there in the world.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cutrano?
Yeah, thank you very much. Michelle, you're the best. I feel like when I come into town hall early or late, it really doesn't matter. You're usually there working. And it's always good to know when your light is on, because it means that I can come and check in and say hi to you. And it's always going to be a good conversation, and it's always going to be lighthearted, even if there are hard issues. You just bring so much levity to the work of local government, which can feel really challenging often, even for seemingly innocuous issues like, a pothole or something. There's lots of issues, but you always bring a positive attitude, which is so critical to making the town hum in a nice way. And I think the other thing is that I think about when I think of you is the fact that, like, government over time has had more rules and more things in order to create order from chaos, or so to speak. And as folks have mentioned, you're really good at creating order and creating systems and things like that. But also in local government, in any government, there could be a sort of coldness that can come with that activity, and like it can feel a lot more like a machine than like a community, and people that help you at town hall and people and I feel like when I think of the sort of quintessence of what like local government can be in a like serious and generative or transformative kind of way, not like a Parks and Rec haha funny kind of way, but also a little bit of that. But like when I think about it in like a really transformative way, I think of just the generosity and the kindness and the good spirit that you bring to that work, which is it's like critical. It's like the underpinnings of government, but like we lose it along the way. But it really is the people that makes local government work. And I totally agree with Councilmember Ackerman. There should be like many, many Michele Gardner days in the town of Fairfax, because you've definitely kept things moving along, and this whole community is, so thankful for that. So thank you very much, and best of luck on your next adventure.
Thank you.
And I just want to close before we have a little reception to say, Michelle, you predated me on the council by a few months. So you and I have been sort of hand in hand. I'm really not happy that you won't be here while I'm mayor. You left me in 2019 for a few months. But I just want to say you have been truly amazing. You do have a good sense of humor. Sometimes, the stress of the job has gotten to you, as it has for everyone that works here. It's hard being in a small town, but you have been so knowledgeable. And just the other day, is something I asked about from way before your time. You immediately pulled it up and sent it to me. So Christine is doing a fabulous job. She's going to have some big shoes to step into, or smaller shoes, but but anyway, we honor you. We will miss you. You have been more than the glue. And I'm sorry to see you go, but I'm glad that you're able to do so and still be happy living in this town, because I know it's been pretty trying at times. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
So with that, we're going to take about a 10-minute break for a little reception. There's treats. Now, don't get used to the treats every time, but there will be treats. Thank you. Okay, everyone. Sorry, I'm a little discombobulated. Okay, we are going to conduct a public hearing and consider certifying an environmental impact report and adopting the 2023-2031 housing element. And I know this is Planning Director Jeff Beiswinger. Beiswinger, can you tell me how to pronounce your name, Jeff?
Beiswinger.
Beiswinger, very good. And also, I know we have a number of supplements. I'm sorry for screaming at everybody. And you might want to, Jeff, you might want to tell everyone about the supplements so that people are clear when they're looking, because we did have some change documents, and it may be helpful for those of us who read them but got confused. All right, so thank you. Take it away, Jeff.
I will share my screen because we have a PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I'll just get that going and then I'll describe the supplements.
And you might want to tell us if there are others that will be presenting with you as well.
Yeah, just let me
Okay,
get this
when you're
going
ready.
here.
And just to be clear, I know we always say this, these PowerPoints will be posted, correct?
Correct.
Okay, tomorrow. All right, great. Thank you.
Okay, so first off, I am here with Andrew Hill with the consulting.
Okay, so I just want to, I do the same thing. You're going to have to really get really close to the mic.
So I'm here with Andrew Hill with the consulting firm of Dye & Batia, who did most of the preparation for the housing elements. We also have someone with our city attorney's office on Zoom, Sarah Osowitz.
Janet, you need to speak into the mic for the recording.
I was just Sarah Osowitz, my colleague.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
And then just a brief description of the late breaking information that's in front of you. First of all, we have a complete replacement for resolution 2359, which is the just the shorthand description. It's the CEQA resolution. And what that does is it provides an attachment, which is a very important legal document called the Findings of Fact and Statement of Overriding Considerations. And then it has an exhibit of the MMRP. And so
don't use acronyms, please.
a mitigation monitoring reporting program, which is also part of the final environmental impact report.
Thank you.
And so both of those documents are included as exhibits. So we'll be requesting that you consider adopting that first later on. And then the other last minute thing we did is we did a thorough review for the last check of typos, and we found just a few typos and corrections. And so that's that errata that's in front of you. We also did a replacement of Exhibit A to the housing element just because the table had a really small text. And so we reformatted that so it was 11 by 17 paper, easy to read. And we also redid Appendix G, which was the comparison to other jurisdictions. Also appendix to the housing element, and that was because one of the tables was formatted incorrectly. So those are some corrections that we made so that when you do adopt or when you consider adoption tonight, you'll be adopting, a much cleaner version of the housing element and the environmental impact document than you would have otherwise.
So if we do adopt,
Mhm.
we need to be clear to mention the supplements.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much for that clarification.
Mhm. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrew Hill to go through the PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening.
So Andrew, I'm like the teacher here. You got to pretty much.
Closer?
Yeah,
There we
really close, because I think this is very important and it's hard to know when you're right next to it how loud you sound. Thank you.
Okay. So good evening, Council. Thank you, Jeff. And so next slide, please. Tonight is really the culmination of a year's worth of work on the Fairfax housing element, and a lot of progress has been made. The public review draft housing element was released for local review in March, together with a notice of preparation for the environmental impact report. The town council reviewed the draft housing element and the public comments that had been made on it in May, directing staff to send the document up to Sacramento to start the legally mandated 90-day review. Following completion of review by the state, staff prepared a red line version of the housing element addressing comments that were received from the Department of Housing and Community Development, and that's included in the packet tonight. A draft environmental impact report was released in September, analyzing the potential impacts of implementing the housing element. And then at the end of November, a hearing was held before the Planning Commission, and the commission recommended certification of the EIR and adoption of the housing element. So that brings us to the meeting tonight. Next slide, please. And so in my presentation tonight, I'd like to provide an overview of the housing element, including the legal requirements and the sites and the strategies that it contains, and also provide an overview of the EIR, touching on the purpose of that document, some of the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act, the EIR process, and a summary of the impacts and mitigations, as well as a summary of the public comments that were received on the draft. So tonight, then, the key objectives for the meeting are, as I say, to provide that overview of the housing element and the EIR, to hear comments from the public, and then, if appropriate, the recommended actions from the town council are to certify the EIR and adopt the housing element. So let me provide a little background context on some of the legal requirements for the housing element, particularly for community members who may be watching at home. The housing element is one of 8 state mandated elements of the general plan, along with land use and circulation, conservation, open space, safety, and noise. It's essentially the town's plan for addressing local housing needs. By law, it needs to be updated once every 8 years to plan for the coming 8-year cycle. But unlike other elements of the general plan, it's subject to numerous statutory requirements, including that it be reviewed and certified by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. So state law requires certain core components for the housing element, and chief among these is an inventory of sites that are available for housing. That's typically shown on a map and accompanied by a table with the projections of realistic capacity for housing on each of those sites. The housing element also needs to include an assessment of housing needs for groups like seniors, the disabled, female-headed households. All of that's based on a review of census data and other information. It needs to include an assessment of environmental, regulatory, and market-based constraints to housing, and an analysis of impediments to fair access to housing opportunities for disadvantaged groups like low-income households, linguistically or ethnic minority groups. And then based on the findings of that analysis, the housing element must include an action plan of implementing programs that address those special needs, those constraints to housing, and any fair housing issues identified. So a term that you hear a lot in the context of the housing element is RHNA. It stands for the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And it's essentially the number of new housing units that the town must plan for in the upcoming 8-year period. The requirement is not that the town build these units, but rather that the town ensure that the zoning map has the capacity to accommodate all of them. For the 2023 to 31 planning period, the town's share of the RENA is 490 units, broken down into various income categories as shown on the chart here. The income categories are based on the countywide area median income. So households making less than 80% of the area median income are considered low income, and households making more than 120% are considered above moderate. So the town is legally required to adopt a housing element that complies with state law, and failure to do so can result in lawsuits, fines, or penalties. This may include the loss of funding for transportation improvements and other state-funded projects. It could result in court-imposed fines of up to $600,000 a month. And it can lead to lawsuits that can result in the loss of local control over zoning and project approval, or even court-mandated compliance, including completion of the housing element by a court appointee. So the revised draft housing element was published in November, and it includes an inventory of sites that's almost identical to the inventory that was in the public review period, but with a few modifications. First, in response to comments from the Department of Housing and Community Development, some of the sites identified in the workforce housing overlay were reassigned from low income to moderate income, but the total number of those sites and the capacity is the same. Second, subsequent to publication of the public review draft, the Wall property was sold, and the Marinda Heights Builders Remedy project is not moving forward, and so that site has been removed. Overall, the inventory has a capacity for 598 new homes, which is sufficient to meet Fairfax's RENA requirements at all income levels with a buffer. And that buffer is important to help ensure that there's adequate capacity in case any of the sites don't develop with the number of units anticipated, so that the town can be sure to comply with the no net loss requirements of state law. So let me break down the inventory for you. It projects, first of all, a capacity for 57 new single-family homes on vacant properties with residential zoning today. These include 11 pipeline projects and 46 vacant lots with single-family zoning. The action plan, which is in Chapter 4 of the housing element, contains a program under which the town will develop and adopt standards to permit low impact clustering of single family and accessory units on some larger sites with single family zoning that have appropriate access and availability of utilities. The intent of this strategy would be to allow small clustered housing on relatively flatter portions of these larger sites, while preserving larger areas of the sites as open space and protecting ridgelines. The element does not propose to change the land use designation or increase the permitted density on any of these larger single family sites, but only to give the property owners the option of clustering. The inventory also assumes development of pipeline projects, those 11 single family that I mentioned previously. In addition, there's an 8-unit multifamily apartment project on the northern portion of the Fairfax Market site, and 175 units on the School Street Plaza site, including 140 market rate units and 35 below market rate units. The owner is talking to real estate developers now to develop the project concept, and a program has been included in the action plan to facilitate development of the site. Accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units can be counted towards the RENA. The projections are not site specific, rather they're done at the townwide level, and they're based on the annual rate of construction permits that have been issued in Fairfax since 2018. The town has permitted on average 11 units per year since 2018. However, based on a robust suite of programs that are contained in the action plan in Chapter 4 of the housing element, we're projecting 20 ADUs and junior ADUs a year over the 8-year period, for a total of 160. And the inventory also projects a capacity for 371 new multifamily units on underutilized commercial properties, primarily in the town center and along Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. These sites are all in locations with good access to transit, shops, and services as required under state law. New state law, specifically AB 2011 and SB 6 that came into force this year, allows for housing development on commercially and office zone sites subject to design standards set by the state. However, Program 2A in the housing element would create a workforce housing overlay applicable to certain sites that gives the owners the option either to redevelop with commercial uses consistent with the base zoning that's currently in place, or to add infill multifamily development on the sites if they choose to do so. New development would be subject to objective design and development standards, and additionally, because several of the sites included in this workforce housing overlay were included on prior inventories, but did not develop, the zoning for those sites must be updated to allow for housing by right if the owner proposes to make at least 20% of the units affordable to lower income households.
Andrew, can I ask a quick
Yes.
question too? Just to clarify, I saw these slides because they were already uploaded. These two photographs that are referring to workforce housing overlay sites as well as sites used for prior inventories, the shape file still includes the wall property. I didn't know if that was accidentally pulled over, but I wanted to just make sure that you all caught that and we could update that in the slide deck.
We can do that, yes.
Okay, great. And just wanted to confirm that for the public because it can get confusing seeing these maps with that still on there. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councilmember Cutrano,
Yeah.
for checking that.
And then finally, another strategy included in the housing element is to make 2 adjacent town-owned sites that currently have residential zoning available. They've been identified as candidates for redevelopment with workforce housing. And so the town would, through a program in the housing element, partner with a nonprofit developer to construct 10 units that would be affordable to restaurant employees, service workers, teachers, public servants, and other people who work in Fairfax and make less than 80% of the area median income. These sites have a combined area of half an acre, and housing built on that site would be subject to objective design and development standards. And so, as I've mentioned, Chapter 4 contains that action plan with 43 programs to be implemented over the next 8 years. It's organized around 5 key goals that correspond to the requirements of state law and the particular challenges that Fairfax faces. Those goals are to increase the range of housing options available in the community, to address housing affordability by addressing regulatory process and market factors that limit housing production, to promote suitable and affordable housing for special needs populations, to foster equal access to housing opportunity, and to monitor the effectiveness of housing programs and ensure that they respond to housing needs. So let me now move to the environmental impact report. Adopting the housing element and the related zoning amendments is a discretionary action that triggers the need for environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act. Implementation of the housing element could result in one or more significant impacts, and so the decision was made to prepare an environmental impact report or an EIR. The purpose of the EIR is to inform the public and decision makers about potential impacts, to identify ways to reduce or avoid those impacts, and to describe reasonable alternatives that could reduce or avoid those impacts. The housing element EIR is a program EIR, which means that it analyzes the impacts of implementing the policies and the regulations, but not necessarily of specific individual projects that may be built under the housing element. Subsequent projects may need to do additional CEQA to address any site-specific impacts associated with the development that can't be known at this stage. The draft EIR found that, so the draft EIR covered the full range of environmental topics defined in state law, everything from aesthetics and visual resources to air quality, biological resources, geology and soils, noise, mineral resources, and wildfire, all the 16 categories you can see up here. Next slide. This is a snapshot of the overall process. At the beginning of the process, a notice of preparation was released to let interested parties and public agencies know that an EIR would be prepared, and to invite comment on the scope of issues that need to be considered and potential mitigation measures could address them. There was a 30-day comment period to collect that information. Then following the close of that period, we went away and we conducted the analysis, taking on board the feedback that we heard during the scoping period. Then a draft of the EIR was released at the end of September. That was available for public comment for a period of 45 days, in fact, a little over 45 days. And following the close of that period, we reviewed the comments received and provided responses to all comments related on environmental issues, and released a final EIR on November 30th. And that brings us to public hearings. So as I mentioned, we had a public hearing before the Planning Commission, and here we are tonight before the council. In summary, the draft EIR found that most of the impacts would be less than significant. It found that there would be significant impacts related to a handful of issues related to air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, and greenhouse gas emissions, but that 7 of those impacts could be reduced to a less than significant level with mitigation measures. 2 impacts under well, actually, it's 3 impacts under 3 impacts under 2 categories were found to be significant and unavoidable, even after all implementation of all feasible mitigation measures. And so those impacts are related to GHG emissions and to transportation. Next slide.
Greenhouse gas
emissions, yeah.
And just, you just skipped, go back to that slide. The last comment is no cumulatively considerable impacts.
That is correct. There were no cumulative considerable impacts. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. Yes. I think it might be helpful to explain a little bit about a VMT as we get into this. There we are. Yeah.
So vehicle miles traveled.
Vehicle miles traveled. So VMT is the metric for evaluating transportation impacts under CEQA is VMT, and it stands for vehicle miles traveled. It's the total length of all trips taken by people in Fairfax, and it's measured in miles. So a community with a high VMT is typically a car-dependent community, whereas communities where housing is located near jobs and shops and other destinations will tend to have lower VMT. As Fairfax adds housing, it's natural that the total VMT will go up, but VMT impacts under CEQA are measured on a per capita basis. And so you can have an improved VMT result even as you add more housing if the location of that housing would result in fewer trips or shorter trips.
Right. And can you clarify that per capita means per person?
Per person, per head. Right. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So in Fairfax's case, this is exactly what happened. The location of the housing, the focus of workforce housing in the town center area, and the emphasis on accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units resulted in a drop in per capita VMT by 10.4%, which is a significant improvement. However, the threshold established under state law is a 15% reduction over current townwide VMT. And so through that lens, although the reduction is impressive, it's not enough to count as a less than significant impact. And so next slide. So there are some potential measures available to reduce VMT. They include increasing infill development, managing parking demand, or employment-based transportation demand management strategies, such as carpooling or transit incentives, incentives for transit or enhancing transit service. As I mentioned, the housing element already has a strong focus on workforce housing in the town center area, and so infill intensification is built into the plan. There, just where Fairfax is, there are not a lot of major employers here, which means that many people have to commute outside of the community for work, and there's limited things that the town can do to move the needle on commute trips, and that's why we haven't been able to get below the threshold of a 15% reduction. However, and there aren't any further mitigation measures available to help reduce the impact. So even after the significant improvement, the impact will remain significant and unavoidable. Next slide. And so the second significant unavoidable impacts relates to greenhouse gas emissions, and in this case, the Fairfax Climate Action Plan establishes a target of net zero emissions by 2030, and the executive order from the governor establishes a statewide target of carbon neutrality by 2045. The overall emissions per capita would exceed those targets and would be significant. Next slide. The EIR proposes a mitigation measure to address this, and that mitigation measure involves updating the Climate Action Plan for 2030. However, because the update has not yet been completed and the specific measures have not yet been identified, the EIR conservatively assumed that the impact would remain significant and unavoidable, because it couldn't be said with certainty what new measures would be incorporated and that they would have the effect of bringing it down below a level of less than significance. And so, as I mentioned, the draft EIR was released for public comment on November 26th or September 26th and remained available until November 13th. During that period, there were 14 comment letters received with 167 unique comments. And some of the key themes that emerged from those comments had to do with biological resources, VMT and transportation, the 615 Oak Manor settlement agreement, priority conservation areas and hillside development, the Marin Town and Country Club site, landslide risk, and wildfire and emergency evacuation. So with respect to biological resources, we received a letter from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, who requested a checklist for subsequent project review and some additional mitigation measures for northern spotted owl and bat species of special concerns. That project-specific checklist has been included as Appendix G to the EIR. And mitigation measures Bio 1 and Bio 3 were enhanced to add and to strengthen protections for the northern spotted owl and for bat species of concern. In terms of transportation, Caltrans requested consideration of additional mitigation measures to reduce VMT. As I mentioned, the draft EIR has considered all potential mitigation measures, including strategies related to infill development, employment-based transportation demand management, parking demand management, and transit service enhancements. Because the housing element already incorporates infill strategies, and because the other mitigation measures are not a feasible option for the town, even after there are no further mitigation measures that could be incorporated, and the VMT impact remains significant and unavoidable.
Just a comment. When I worked for the Department of Toxic Substances Control, I had staff that did those kind of letters. And my view of the Caltrans letter was it was very generic. It was not specific to Fairfax. It was kind of like a lot of the letters we used to send out. They were very generic on the kinds of things that we looked at. So whereas that might work in Los Angeles, some of the things that they were suggesting, as you pointed out, we don't have control over the buses, etc. So just when I read that letter, it looked very familiar to me. Thank you.
Can I ask one quick clarifying
Yes.
question on that last slide
Yep.
too, which is you have that litany of the, the parking demand management and other non-motorized incentives and stuff like that. Are the second bullet saying that there are certain other mitigation measures that do not represent a feasible option for the town? Is it referring to the measures that are identified in that first bullet?
Correct. Yeah.
I
And
see.
so infill development, because of the focus on the workforce housing overlay, infill development is already built into the housing element. And so there's not much more that we can do for infill. Because as I mentioned, the major employers are typically located outside of Fairfax. There's not many levers the town can pull to reduce those commute trips lengths. And so there isn't further mitigation there because the town doesn't control transit agencies. Similarly, those kind of measures that might be available to other communities like Los Angeles, like Barbara was saying, those are not available to Fairfax and they remain infeasible.
Right. Okay. So it's all predicated on commute trips for the most, or by and large, commute
That's
trips.
the biggest generator of VMT.
Thank you.
There were a number of comments related to the 615 Oak Manor settlement agreement. Some people questioned whether development is feasible at that site, given a settlement agreement to a 1991 lawsuit. That agreement established a term of 2 years for phases A to C of that former project, and then provided an additional 3 years for phase D, which is all of that pursuant to the Subdivision Map Act. The town would have had to approve a tentative vesting map within those terms if an application had been received. However, no application was received, and the town doesn't have evidence of an ordinance extending the terms, and therefore, it's the town attorney's opinion that the settlement agreement is no longer in force and would not impede development on the 615 Oak Manor site. Next slide. Several comments also asserted that development would not be consistent with local open space regulations or would conflict with designated priority conservation areas or PCAs. I want to point out again that the general plan land use and zoning permits housing on all of the sites identified in the inventory. These comments primarily relate to some of those larger hillside sites. And as I mentioned, the program 2D in the housing element would allow for low impact clustered residential development. It would not increase the base density applicable to those sites, but instead it would give the property owners the option to cluster the same number of units that's already allowed in the zoning in a way that would allow for economies of scale, reduce the need for infrastructure, and at the same time would require larger areas, 75% of the remainder of the site to remain as open space, and would also incorporate standards for view and ridgeline protection. With respect to the priority conservation area question, the Plan Bay Area 2050 does not specifically define the boundaries of any PCA in Fairfax. They're shown as points in the data, which you can see on the map at the right. There was also a 2016 staff report from the Transportation Authority of Marin that states no map of the PCAs existed at the time they were initially introduced into Plan Bay Area. And even if we did know the precise boundaries, there is no regulation or easement in place with those that would preclude residential development on the privately owned property. Really, in the case of those larger sites that may come in proximity to priority conservation areas, it's really environmental and infrastructure constraints that are the primary limiting factor as opposed to any regulation. Several commenters in response to the draft EIR advocated for housing at the Marin Town and Country Club site and believed that the mixed-use development alternative, which considered housing on that site, should be identified as the environmentally superior alternative in the EIR. In fact, the no project alternative was identified as the environmentally superior alternative because it would result in the fewest impacts. However, it would not be feasible because it would not result in a legally compliant certifiable housing element. And so it was passed over. And so the next choice then became that mixed use alternative, which considered development at the Marin Town and Country Club site. And it was environmentally preferable to the proposed plan because it would slightly reduce the significant and unavoidable impacts related to GHG emissions and to VMT. However, at the same time, it would also increase some other impacts, and it would be infeasible because a ballot measure would be needed to change the zoning, and it can't be said with certainty at this time that that ballot measure would pass and that the zoning would be changed in time to allow for development on the site within the planning period. And then also several commenters were concerned about landslide risk and its impact on new and existing developments. The EIR found that compliance with existing regulations, including the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System and the local town code and general plan regulations would reduce landslide impacts to the extent practicable. And some other commenters questioned how construction would minimize wildfire risks and how it could impact emergency evacuation with an increased population. And so there's requirements in the California Building Code for the use of materials and techniques to reduce wildfire risk, compliance with that. And also there's requirements for the development of a fire protection plan for new development in fire hazard areas. In compliance with those regulations would reduce the impacts to the extent practicable. And then while increased development could increase traffic on Sir Francis Drake, which is the primary evacuation route, there is at the countywide level a robust framework of emergency preparedness and evacuations in place, and that it relies on strategies from local planning efforts to bolster emergency response and evacuation. And on the basis of that, impacts were found to be less than significant.
And just note that we adopt the California building codes and the fire codes every 3 years. And I believe we just did that last year in December. So FYI for people who, it's not just a state law, we have to adopt them. Thank you.
And so at the end of November, we did hold a hearing before the Planning Commission. And to give you a quick summary, the Planning Commission asked a number of clarifying questions. They asked for clarification around sources of data for wildfire and for in-commute data into the town. They asked how property owner interest was confirmed. And they asked again about some of the consequences for non-compliance with state law. Answers were provided for all of these topics. Next slide. And they had a couple of comments as well. That, as Jeff said, they pointed out some clerical errors that have been corrected for the packet tonight and in errata. And commissioners also emphasized the need for the town to focus on implementing measures that can further reduce VMT, such as the bicycle and pedestrian improvements that are identified in the 2016 Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan.
And just to note that we'll be convening a bicycle and pedestrian plan in the coming year. So we'll be updating that plan as well.
Great. And so that brings us to look ahead to the next steps. Just to note that the housing element, the red line version of the housing element has been resubmitted to HCD for their hopefully final review and certification. We had an interim call with our HCD reviewer earlier in the week, and we had another one in November as well to run by the red lines and confirm that they are adequately responding to the HCD comments, and we received positive feedback. It's informal feedback, but we feel on the basis of those conversations that we're definitely on the right track.
And they have 60 days formally, but have they indicated that they would get back to you sooner than that?
Yes, that's correct. They formally have 60 days from December 5th. We're anticipating that at the midpoint, about 1 month into that, they will provide either a letter saying that we're conditionally in compliance, or maybe a small punch list of final things to clean up. That's typically how they would work.
Thank you.
And so that brings us to the hearing tonight for certification where the council will consider certification of the EIR and adoption of the housing element. But following that, we're continuing in parallel to work on zoning amendments for implementation of the housing element. There's a study session with the Planning Commission tomorrow night to look at the workforce housing overlay. And the Planning Commission will be considering a recommendation on the low impact clustered residential standards.
I think that you've got that a little mixed up. So tomorrow night, you're looking at the low impact clustered hearing, right?
Yes.
That's tomorrow night. And then January 10th, you'll be looking at the Planning Commission will do a hearing on the workforce housing overlay, but also tomorrow night, I believe the Planning Commission will do a study session on the workforce housing overlay, which I think is really helpful for people to have even more time. So thanks for adding that.
Yeah. Yeah. And anyway, so we anticipate bringing the amendments to the council in January, and then as I say, following the close of that, hopefully within 30 days, but definitely within 60 days of December 5th, we'll get that letter from.
I think there's an error in what you've got up there on the dates. The council on January 10th will be looking at a potential first reading of the low impact cluster. On January 11th is when the Planning Commission is having a special meeting. So those dates aren't quite right. So December 14th, tomorrow night, the Planning Commission will do the hearing for the low impact clustered, a study session on the workforce housing overlay zoning tomorrow night. On January 10th, the town council will consider doing a first reading of the low impact clustered zoning. And then the Planning Commission would do a hearing on January 11th for the workforce housing overlay. And then the town council would do a hearing on zoning amendments on January 24th. So just as Councilmember Cutrano pointed out an error, let's get that corrected. So
it's just a typo on the PC hearing, the Planning Commission hearing, just switch to the 11th and then add a new row.
That's actually
add a new row for the 10th for our.
Yeah, but the Planning Commission is not doing a hearing on workforce housing overlay on January 10th. It's January 11th.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
All he needs to do is change that to the 11th and add a row for our hearing on the 10th.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. Thank you for helping. This is, I think it's hard to keep all this straight, but we want to make sure that everybody understands the dates. And I know everybody's got a lot of folks are very interested in this. So thanks for doing that. And sorry for interruption.
That's okay. We'll correct this PowerPoint before it gets posted tomorrow. And so the recommended order of operations next would be to hear clarifying questions from the town council, then to open up the hearing for public testimony, and finally to move to consideration of the resolutions before you.
Okay. Sorry, I just cut myself off. Just one clarification. It's a public hearing, item 2. So it's a little more than just regular public comment. So I would open this up to my colleagues on the council. If you have any just clarifying questions, I know it was a lot of information to read. So does anyone have any clarifying questions? Councilmember Cutrano.
Thank you, Mayor. Lot of information. So thank you for trying to figure out how to fit all of this stuff into the slide deck. That was great. So early on in this, in the slides, you had mentioned 11 pipeline projects that are either approved or under review. And then you went on and that was what I was curious about. And I think, there are a number of sites that are on the map, and I'm sure there are members in the community that are wondering which are currently moving forward and which are just sort of suggested. But then there was the slide that followed it, which was 11 single family homes, and then the 8 units at Fairfax Market, and then the School Street project, which is more than 11. And I was it's like, that's 13 different projects. And so I was curious if you could share, what pipeline projects are approved and what are under review. So then, the assumption is that the rest of them are outside of that and there's been no application, correct?
Right. I think if you go just one slide further, next one, no, forward. Yep. One more. Yeah, this slide is talking about the projects that are sites that it's talking about vacant sites. In total, there are 57 vacant sites. So 46 vacant sites with no application on them, but are potentially available for single family development, and 11 vacant sites that have a single family application in some stage, whether approved or under construction or under review. So that's what that is. And then the next slide is about pipeline projects. So I repeated those 11 on vacant sites, and also talked about multifamily pipeline projects and some stage of conception. And so there's the 8 multifamily units at the Fairfax Market, for which an application is pending, and the 175 at School Street, where there's a concept being worked out, but no formal application at this point.
Got it. That's super helpful. Thanks for clarifying the vacant plus. So that's helpful. One of the other questions, it came out of the Planning Commission deliberations, which were also very productive and informative to watch the recording of. I'm curious, the Town of Fairfax has been leading on incorporation of the Cross Marin Bikeway into what we're now developing, which is a new countywide transportation plan for the County of Marin, the first ever. And I'm curious if those sorts of activities are things that can be incorporated to address some of the VMT things as well. If as a region, we're making significant improvements or are kind of calling out these bicycle networks in order to get people onto safer paths and out of single occupancy vehicles. But I know that many of the commutes you were suggesting are, out of Fairfax, but, being on the Transportation Commission, we're trying to figure out how do you create infrastructure regionally that can keep people out of cars as well. So are there ways to still incorporate any of those things, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think so the VMT analysis is done with the regional model. The Transportation Authority of Marin has a model, and there's factors in the model that are accounting for the existing mileage of bike lanes and accounting for some reduction. And I think over time, the model will be updated. So as, for example, the Cross Marin Bikeway project gets built out or other mileage gets planned, that'll be fed into the model. And in future, when the model is run again, it'll, as it's updated, it'll reflect the future conditions. And so as more bicycle infrastructure gets built and planned, the model will pick that up and factor it into the results.
Got it. Thank you. And then 2 more quick questions, and they're related to open space issues. I know y'all mentioned that the PCA priority conservation area, they don't have super defined shapes, but we did receive public comment in this public comment packet, and it included the priority conservation areas from the Fairfax Open Space Committee. And there are shapes. There are some are more defined. Some, like the one that include the wall property, was more defined. PCA 3, I think it is. Then there are others that are like Central Marin Ridgelines priority conservation areas, which are kind of all over the place, and there's a ton of development already occurring within them. How does this map get rectified with the things that we're hearing from our partner agencies at ABAG MTC or at TAM?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, in responding to these public comments, we did reach out to Metro. They call themselves MTC ABAG now, Metro is in the process of updating the map of priority conservation areas, and they're collecting data from the process for creating a priority conservation area is for the local jurisdiction to nominate it first. And you will see in Plan Bay Area 2050, some of the priority conservations do have very well defined boundaries, and not all of them. And the ones around Fairfax do not. So Metro is in the process of collecting data again from the local communities to define the boundaries and update them for the next iteration of the plan. And I believe I know in the final ER we noted the particular gentleman over there who's leading up that effort, who provided some feedback for us in response to this comment.
Great, thank you. And then I guess my final comment for right now is sort of a follow on to that. So if there are if there's development contemplated for that, like within the housing element in areas that are adjacent to or overlap with these older shapes of places we wanted to conserve as much as possible, is it in those and I'm thinking of sites 6 on here, 3, or some of these places that are on the west side of town closer to Loma Alta. Is it your understanding that we kind of lay out the framework, the zoning overlays and things like that, because there may be more sensitive habitat, or even School Street, abutting Fairfax Creek, there's sensitive habitat in the area. It is called out less than significant, or there are programs you can implement, but would that require site-specific EIR, or I should say site-specific CEQA process for those sites? Is that your understanding of it?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. So if we think about a large site, a 35 acre site that has residential zoning at the programmatic level in the EIR, we don't know exactly where on that site the housing will be. We generally know, where there's areas of potential landslide or other geologic instability, or maybe there's creeks or something. And so we can generally say, because of those environmental conditions, here's a mitigation measure that can preclude, to the extent that we can know at this time. But then when specific development is actually proposed, if we would know precisely where on the site that would happen and what the dimensions and the extent of that development is. And there may be, at that point, there might be some project-specific, site-specific impact that emerges that isn't covered in this programmatic EIR. And that, in a case like that, yes, subsequent CEQA would be required to address that site-specific or project-specific impact.
Great. I think that's super helpful for the public to know, especially when this is being contemplated at a high level. So I appreciate that. That's all my questions for now.
And just one of the options when you do site-specific CEQA, because you have a programmatic EIR, if something you could tier off rather than doing a separate EIR, but you would do an initial study and decide what makes sense. Correct?
That's exactly right. So that project wouldn't have to do its own full-blown EIR if there was only just one, for example, geologic issue. It could do an initial study to demonstrate why there wouldn't be impacts on the other resource categories and just focus on that one issue and make sure that there's adequate mitigation measure to address that project-specific issue.
Okay, so we can basically build on what we've got today.
Yeah,
okay. Thank you. Councilmember Hellman, I think you had your hand raised.
Thank you very much. It's really good so far. So I have questions, comments.
Let's keep it to questions.
Well, my comments are more around typos that I caught, and I know a lot of us caught them, but do you want me to do that later?
Let's deal with that later. Let's just ask clarifying questions. Unless it's something that's really changing the meaning.
Yeah, that's fine. So I would like clarity or just a better understanding of a couple of these added programs. And so Jeff, I think this is a question for you as well. To hold a lot of these have pretty aggressive time frames that we're committing to, and just from a project management standpoint, like what kind of software or like a calendaring system to ensure that I mean, there's a lot in here that says even first quarter, you know? So I'm just curious your thoughts on that, but I would like to understand better, program 3G and 3H.
Well, I can answer the staff workload issue just a little bit. Is we do have a recruitment out for a housing planner.
Right.
And so we're hoping to hire that person within the next couple of months. Where the application period closes on, I think, January 8th, I believe.
Okay.
And so, we already have a pretty good collection of folks that are interested in that position. So anyway, so that person's going to have their hands full when they start.
Okay.
So that's a
Is
partial
there
answer.
any, like matrix that download from a calendaring standpoint, like when we are accountable for some of this stuff?
Oh, we can do that. I've done that for other jurisdictions where we
Yeah.
make sort of a Gantt chart that says, here's the programs and here's the timing. You can see which ones are being adopted in which quarter of what year.
Yeah.
We can prepare that for the town. That would be a helpful implementation tool. I'd also note, you'll see in the red line version that a number of these programs have actually already been implemented when the council adopted the first module of administrative zoning amendments that took care of a lot of that code cleanup to bring the code into compliance with new state law. So a lot of these things have been done, and a number of them can be done at one fell swoop like that with a sort of an omnibus code
But you've
cleanup.
already noted when they have been
Yes.
done. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And probably a third part to that question is that every year we do a report to HCD and a progress report. And so that's a pretty rigorous analysis of where we are with our housing element targets.
Nice.
And so anyway, so every year you'll get an update at the very least. So.
Okay.
Okay, and so I don't know who's going to discuss 3G and 3H, but before you do, could you say what they are? Because I
Sure.
don't know that everyone
Sure.
knows here what they are.
So 3G is a program called Development and Replacement Unit Requirements. This is something that HCD requested in their comment letter. It is in the workforce housing overlay. There's a couple of the sites identified that do have existing units. And so state law requires that a jurisdiction put in place a measure to ensure that you're not going to lose units, right? There was not going to be any net loss of units. So if there's existing units that would be redeveloped on any of the housing element sites, that new project would need to at least replace that number of units.
Okay.
And that's what this program is saying.
Okay.
The town is committing to ensuring that the council is not going to approve a project that would result in a net loss of units on any given site. And it's citing the specific state code provision.
Okay, thank you.
And then you also asked 3H, which is housing for special needs populations and extremely low income households. Again, this is something that was added in response to a comment from HCD. They were specifically looking for, so special needs populations and extremely low income households are very high needs groups. And they required subsidized housing that has additional financial feasibility challenges, and so the state is looking for a program, a commitment from the town to work with any project applicant proposing to build that type of housing, and try and find some additional incentives to help with the financial feasibility of those projects. And so those could include, and they're listed in the program, expedited review processing, granting density bonuses, those type of extra incentives that can help with those financially challenged projects.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Did you have any critical flaws that you noticed in typos that you want to bring up?
Well, I'm not done with my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Let's see. I asked that one.
And I do think the matrix with the dates would be really helpful to have, like a big copy pasted on Jeff's wall, because I think, we add all these dates, and it would be really simple to be looking at that saying, have we done that?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess this is more of a comment, but I just have two other things. So I really appreciate Appendix G in particular. I thought the layout and just the information, the way it was provided was really, really good. So thank you for that. I'd number 4 in particular, the B of A, the 89 Broadway. I know in many cases you would state if, you know, the parcel owner was interested in development. I'm just curious on that one. Have we made contact? Have we had any communication exchange besides a letter outgoing? Has there been any communication back?
I did communicate with that property owner and they are interested in selling the property. However, they're just interested in selling the property. They're not necessarily interested in housing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then just on the subject of clustering, sorry, my notes are not as organized as maybe someone else. On this, I did some independent research on clustering. And from what I can tell, the pros are all tend to be environmental related. Is that accurate?
There's definitely, yes, I think that's true. There's also economic benefits to it. If you think about instead of building 4 single family homes, acres apart or miles apart on a large property, if you cluster them, then it just costs less to develop the infrastructure, the roads and the pipes of the wire. So there's definitely ecologic, environmental benefits, but there's also economic benefits in terms of economies of scale and the infrastructure provision.
And just to be a little bit of a planning nerd for a while, the where clustering comes from is, if you're familiar with the design with nature concept and that type of thing with Randall Arendt, Rural by Design, kind of these thinkers back in the 80s and 90s. So they kind of developed out of the environmental movement, where the idea is that you would identify critical natural resources on the site, whether they're woodlands, steep hillsides, wetlands, and then you'd set those areas aside. And then instead of sprawling a development out, 5 acres at a time, which would chop up all those natural resources into big lots, and they would systematically destroy the ecological context. The idea was to set aside the natural resources, and then on the remaining land, you would take the same number of allowed units and you would cluster those on smaller lots. So it kind of grew out of a desire to protect the natural environment. So, and we're trying to use that in the same way, because that's the reason why there's the 75% open space requirement.
Great. Thank you. Feel free to nerd out anytime.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Did you want me to wait on the
If there's some that look, I think so.
There's a
Some of
lot.
us pointed out a lot of typos
So you might
before.
have-
I think
so
they might
the
have caught.
word square feet after the number 3600 in WHOB sites corridor number 1. So you're missing the word square feet, I think. And I think you caught, the Victory Village has 54 units. So in the summary table in the beginning of Appendix G, it says 27. So I wasn't sure.
I think that's the density per acre, not it says 54. Yeah, if you look at the previous page, it shows that there's 54. And then it's 27 dwelling units per acre. I believe that's true, but we can clarify that with the people who know better than I.
Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hellman.
So I see.
Vice Mayor Blatt, it's not required to ask questions. If you've already asked, it's fine.
No, I have a lot of questions.
Okay, well, let's hear them.
Okay. One of the things that I just want to check up on, because I've been watching the Planning Commission meeting over and over again, there's a concern about the PCAs, and I understand that they don't currently have defined boundaries, but are any of them even conceivably close to where we have a proposed project site?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. And there's potentially some PCAs nearby, or even including some of the project sites.
Actually, let's look at them. Yeah, we do have a map. Here we go. Yeah. So
Can
this
we just clarify what PCA is for the public? Thank you.
priority conservation area. So the priority conservation area, we got the data from Metro, ABAG, MTC, which is only for points. And so that's what those light green points on the map are. They're presumably, anyway, they represent where the PCAs are. The yellow sites on the map are housing sites in the Fairfax housing element. And so there is, what is that? I can't see. I think it says Fairfax Zone 3 at the top right of the map. That is the PCA point that's closest to one of the housing element sites. Can you see? Or if I could use can you see if I use my cursor? Sorry, it's not.
And I believe that's also close to where the wall property is as well.
But the wall property is not included.
Correct.
So I think your cursor is going crazy.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going anywhere. I know you're trying.
It's not, anyway, the point is there's nothing that's really in close proximity. And until we get the boundaries, we don't quite have a clear answer to that. The best we can say is there's nothing that's on top of a dot or immediately next to a dot right now.
And I noticed that you cited communication with folks at ABAG and MTC. And just also to point out, I was the open space liaison at the time that this application was put together, and they were very ambiguous. But a PCA designation doesn't mean that you couldn't potentially do something in that area, even if it did have boundaries, which it doesn't. It allows you to go for potential grants. And so it's an opportunity for grants. But so I think you pointed out in your slide that there isn't anything specific regulatory about those PCA designations, even if they had boundaries.
Yes.
If there was an easement or something, that would be a different story, but there isn't at this time.
That's right. And the underlying zoning for sites that are identified as opportunity sites in the housing element does permit residential, even if it were to be in a priority conservation area. If it is one of these larger sites that would be eligible for the low impact clustering, then 75% of that site would be preserved as open space, which is generally consistent with the idea of priority conservation there. The housing would be just clustered on a smaller portion of the site consistent with the underlying zoning.
Okay, and I know we'll talk about this more when we talk about the zoning, so maybe I'll leave some of those questions for then. I'm going to ask some specific questions just related to public comment that we've received. So one thing that I noticed is been added to the housing element document and to one of the tables, probably table G2 or G3, I can't remember which. But I've been hearing people say that there is no parking requirement whatsoever for School Street Plaza, but it looks like that is actually specified. Can you maybe reiterate how much parking would be required at School Street Plaza? I'm assuming that that's part of the workforce housing overlay.
That is correct. Jeff, you might have those numbers. It depends on the number of bedrooms, but it's specified in town code. More bedrooms, more parking spaces, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is we don't know. We do have a zoning code which has very specific parking requirements. Now, if something tips into density bonus, then there's an allowable reduction in parking. But I don't think we'd ever get to a point where there's no parking requirement. So
Right, and I did note that it's in the new red line version. There is a section that talks about the amount of parking, and then it refers you to table G2 or G3, which kind of lays out ideally how much parking would be required per the type of unit. So it's just kind of double checking on that, and then. I think one of the things that people have been asking is if we approve the housing element, right, does that 100% guarantee that the owner of that property at School Street Plaza is going to 100% build 175 units?
No, that 175 unit projection has been developed on the basis of conversations with the current owner and the current concept that they've been developing. But there isn't a formal application, and so there's no guarantee that that's the number that would result.
Okay. And then can you kind of explain the approval process that School Street Plaza would go through? Whether, if we pass the housing element versus if we didn't pass the housing element, what sort of process would they go through as a specific project?
Right. So the actual process will be defined not in the housing element, but in the workforce housing overlay implementing zoning. Which is the topic of a study session before the Planning Commission tomorrow. So it could still evolve. But the idea is that particular site was used in prior inventories and did not develop. So it's one of the sites that if the property owner proposes to make at least 20% of the units on the site affordable to lower income households, they would have a by right approval process. But they would need to comply with all of the objective design and development standards that are proposed as part of the workforce housing overlay. And those govern a whole range of topics from height to building architecture to setbacks and step backs, parking, among other things.
Can I just ask the objective design development standards? I believe we already approved those in the administrative zoning. And is there something, I've looked at the workforce housing overlay, but I don't remember, were there new objective design standards put in there?
There are some
additional.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting.
Okay. So yeah, and then without the housing element, what would be the process for that property to be developed? The same or different?
It would be different because the current zoning is I think it's CC, and so there isn't so that any housing would be subject to a conditional use permit, however, again, because that site would be subject to SB 35 streamlining, if the owner, independent of the housing element, were to come up tomorrow, were to propose a project with 20% affordability, they might have the option to do streamlining under SB 35.
So pretty much the same outcome.
It could be, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then another question that I had is wanted to reconfirm about one of the other sites that people talk about a great deal, which is the Marin Town and Country Club. And I think you made it pretty clear that why this is not included in the current housing element. If we added this property to the housing element as one of our sites, would it change anything about the viability of that site for development? Okay. And
you need to speak into the mic.
Oh,
You
sorry.
can't just nod.
No. I said no.
We can't read nods on the tape.
Yeah, it doesn't have zoning that allows for housing. Adding it into the housing element would not change that fact. It would still not have zoning that permits housing until such time as the voters of Fairfax passed a valid initiative changing the zoning.
Okay, so even if we added it to the site list and tried to zone it for housing, it would legally not fly.
You can't rezone it. It can only be rezoned with a vote of the people.
Great. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to.
And that's not a matter of opinion, just for clarity.
I'm sorry?
We're not talking about a matter of opinion. This is fact.
Right, exactly. So I just wanted to reconfirm that that's the case because I want to make sure that I and everyone else entirely understands that because, I've heard a number of people say, why don't we just use that site? Or, gosh, it looks like, slightly preferable in terms of our EIR. Why can't we do it? And I know it's kind of spelled out there, but I just want to keep checking on that. And then let me just check if I have any other questions. Some of them I'm going to hold off on for when we actually talk about zoning, because I think some of them are more appropriate to that. So in terms of the EIR, so each development project within the overall project is going to have to go through its own process. So this doesn't, passing the housing element or accepting the EIR doesn't mean that everything is going to fly through without any checks or balances, right? So even if we accept the EIR, the study could, the additional study that's needed could find that a particular site was not appropriate for development, or maybe not appropriate for as much development as might be, anticipated, right? So that could happen. The numbers that we see on the table of the sites and sort of the, what ideally the amount of housing might be there, that could change based on the study related to those independent projects, right?
Yes. So if we think about the town center, for example, again, we generally know the location of the sites, but we don't know what is actually going to be proposed on those sites. We've tried to include, mitigation measures for the flooding issues or the liquefaction issues down in the downtown area, for example. But when an actual development comes forward and proposes something at a particular building size, at a particular building placement, that could result in a project-specific impact that hasn't been considered in the program EIR. And in that case, the developer would need to do additional CEQA and to mitigate for that impact. That is true.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other council members? No need if you don't have questions.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, I'll just, I had asked most of my questions beforehand as I was reading the documents, but one thing I keep hearing, and I'm not sure if it was in the response in the comments, but I hear it. And I know we don't know exactly what's going to happen with School Street Plaza, but there keeps being this discussion that it would be 7 stories. What do we think is a realistic scenario for if it comes forward, have for 175 is, I don't know where that came from. Is that anything that you all have knowledge of, or what would you speculate? Or is it probably premature to do so?
I think it's a little premature, and it kind of depends on a lot of different factors. It depends on the size of the units, for example. If they propose to do a lot of studio units, then you can, 175 studio units take a lot less space than 175 3-bedroom units. So it sort of depends on the product mix in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It is architecturally possible to do 175 units on that site in 4 stories. It is possible. And I think there's an economic imperative for them to keep it below 5 stories, because once you go 5 stories and above, it's a different type of construction with, different requirements for elevators and for circulation that becomes more expensive. And so if they can keep a lower building, there's, it controls their costs. And so there's an economic incentive for them to build a lower building. Anyway, I think it's, we can't say without knowing what they're going to propose in terms of a unit mix, but there are factors that would indicate that it could be done in 4 stories.
Okay, and so just to reiterate what you said, if you go above 5 stories, there are new rules that apply that aren't specific to the town of Fairfax. There's state laws of things that you have.
Correct.
You have to. No, he said 5. It's 5 above 5 stories.
Yes, correct.
It's above 5 stories.
5 stories. Is it 5 stories and above, or above? Anyway, definitely above 5 stories.
I would say you probably start getting into some new requirements at 5 stories. So once you go above 4 stories. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. So what I want to propose is that we take a 5 to 8 minute break, because I think we've got a public hearing that'll take a little time, or quite a bit of time. So let's take a quick break and reconvene back here about 8:35. Thank you. So I'd like to open the public hearing. And remember, folks, we're going to keep folks to 2 minutes. The timer is up.
I may need 3 minutes.
Well, you'll be taking 2 minutes.
Well, let's see what we get.
Thank you. So Let's go ahead and get started.
Sierra Salem, yes, people have to live somewhere, but Fairfax is already largely built out. We have terrible public transportation, especially at night. We have terrible roads. We have terrible fire danger, and we have terrible access and egress issues. We already have terrible traffic. We now spend our dollars on outside experts who may know the onerous and I believe unconstitutional laws and try and stuff little old Fairburn and Faxvilleshire into them, but they are not us, and they do not know us. Fairfax is not San Rafael or Mill Valley or Novato or most any other places. Fairfax is a narrow valley with two narrow streets, which we call downtown. One-size development mandates do not suit or fit our topography or are what's left of our conservative hippie freak creative population. We seem to be obliterating the past to make us more of an overbuilt and ugly gridlocked time bomb. Yes, humans need to live places, and Fairfax is a disaster in the making if we continue down this unfunded and unmaintained potholy road. We cannot build and consume our way to a healthy future or one worth living in, and build, consume away, etc., regardless of natural constraints and infrastructure, is just another disaster in the making. Fairfax is not a big place with land to spare. There are no simple solutions, and Fairfax is not responsible for the whole world. There are big differences between being exclusive NIMBYs and actually taking care of what's left of the living environments which support life as we thought we know it. I agree with most of what Frank has said and written and pointed out regarding the housing plan. Regarding 615 or 650 or whatever Oak Manor Road, I would like to point out and add that Rob, the owner of the Oak Manor property, died a month or so back. So what now? Not only is the property wrongly being considered for multi-development and nowhere near public transportation, but how many more will be added with the bonus? I got a little bit more to go. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
And
we're gonna
yes,
have to-
I was there.
We're
at the
going to
town-
keep
No.
people to 2 minutes.
Well,
I'm
then
cutting you off. I'm cutting you off. Thank you. Sarah, please sit down. Thank you. Please sit down. Please sit down. Thank you.
Excuse me, you ran my clock. I haven't started. Applying your hillside zoning where you take 75% land as a taking. You may not be sued today, but it is because it's not ripe. As soon as someone wants to develop and does not want to give up 75% of their land, you will be sued. It will be ripe. If someone tries to sell their property and the sale falls through because of your zoning, they will sue. This entire issue could be avoided if instead you offered in lieu of development, expediting process for the land. Then it would be a choice and not subject to a taking. Absent this conversation is also liability for required town maintenance for cutting roads into the area for the purpose of fire mitigation. Add this to a concentration of cars from this cluster development, all clustered in one small area. Such clustering will impede all safety access for fire and ambulance service. One example are the 2 lots on Forest Avenue, totaling half an acre. You zone for 10 units. They are listed in your table B. The single slope is 63 degrees. Barbara Kohler took Scott Hustrasser to discuss building feasibility on the lots. Scott explained that acquiring them and building them would never pencil out. Barbara then suggested the town could gift the property to a workforce housing company to make it more affordable to build. Nice gift of a town asset. My question is this, Barbara, if you take the time to go to Forest Avenue and look at the parcels, why didn't you take the time to notify all the people adversely affected? If each unit had only one person in one car, you're still jamming 10 cars clustered in one little area on a constricted subpar road. Was consideration given to the risk of life for all the people on Forest Avenue? Why are you supporting these 10 units? How can people on Forest escape a raging fire? How will an ambulance or fire truck reach any house on Forest when people are frantically trying to flee? Is this another attempt to hurt the Marin Town and Country Club? Please recall I offered to buy these parcels, build a pedestrian, bicycle, and wheelchair safety path down to my property. My idea will save people. Your idea will be their death sentence.
Thank you.
What profit do you, I'm sorry, what profit do you derive from this unbridled building through your Kohler Environmental
Mike.
Consulting Company?
Please sit down.
This might
Michael, please sit down. 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 Please sit down, Michael. You're disrupting the meeting. Please sit down. Please sit down. Next speaker.
This hearing is a sham and it's being objected to by Todd Greenberg. The EIR housing, this EIR housing element and this public process is deeply flawed. The town council, the planning commission, and Andrew Hill of Diet and Basha have been notified about numerous specific flaws in the past, yet have not remedied them. You would be found at fault if you accepted this report. I have pointed out at least twice before at the prior Town of Fairfax public meetings that because of Fairfax's ultra strict to be publicly voted on in November 2024 rent control ordinances, that according to town officials, public testimony, that ADU applications have ground to a halt in Fairfax as they no longer make sense to build because of this town council's dramatic increases to the cost and risk of building and renting. At the last town council meeting or meeting presentation that Andrew Hill did, he indicated he would provide the annual ADU application building data, but he is not. It appears he is not. And thus Andrew and Diet and Basha's reports are erroneous and misleading in their ADU building assumptions. From the Bagley-Keene Act, the people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give the public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is good for them not to know. Facts. 4 public comments were included online, but left out one important one received at 4:10 p.m. from Jane Richardson Mack. 5 written comments included in the on-site folder, yet Andrew Hill earlier stated 14 comments were received. Isn't the public actually required to be able to see these prior comments which relate to the meeting agenda item? Were the prior comments included in the 7 or 8 or more inches of documents present on the outside podium tonight? If they were not, I question if this is a valid hearing given what seems to be a lack of disclosure and transparency. With regard to the 7 or 8 more inches of document present online, there are 6 publicly posted documents, and I could name them, but I won't because I don't have time. In person at this meeting, there are 6 additional documents that do not appear to be posted online. Isn't the public actually required to be able to see if these additional documents which relate to this online meeting? Thank you, and give us more time, please. This is so inconsiderate of the whole population of Fairfax.
Thank you, Todd. Just want to clarify that comments, we did receive a copy of Miss Jane Richardson Mack's comments, but comments are accepted for the packet until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Her comments came in after 4, but it was sent to the council member, so we did see it. Next speaker, please. Yes, you need
Hello.
to.
Matt Fastberg, I live on Forest Avenue. First of all, I don't know how it serves you guys to limit these comments to 2 minutes when there's this few people here.
We have people on Zoom as well. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm sure. Yeah, how many people? I don't even want to ask. I'm
That's
just going
not
to tell
on
you,
you.
yeah, if you live on, I don't know who walks Forest Avenue before you start thinking we should put 10 houses here, but that road, I swim at the canyon pool and there's a fireman there who walked by my house because we're friends, and he stopped and he said, "Man, is this where you live?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "You should get bicycles. If you need to leave here during a fire, you're not going to get out of here in a car. This road is not in great shape and it's crowded and it's cracked in several spots and it's not a place to put 10 houses." And I don't know if anybody who's really considering that has walked the road and seen the condition of it and the size of the road and what would happen there if you tried to put 10 houses there. That's my main comment. Let me think if there's anything else. No, I just think you should give people more time so you can hear what they have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Mallory Gardner, Fairfax. You guys, you're our representatives. I don't feel represented by any of you on here, especially Barbara. People are telling you that there's not enough time for 2 minutes, and there's no reason. How many people are? I don't see a lot of people lining up on Zoom to talk here, and I think we don't have to beg you to listen and beg you to represent us. And that's what we're doing. I also don't understand from the last person who was speaking, where he gets his numbers about how many bikes there are versus not bikes there are. Many of us don't ride bikes, can't ride bikes, live on hills. And I don't feel heard. I don't feel respected. I don't feel like you guys have our backs. And you're not representatives of most of us and the people, certainly most of us who show up here. And I'd like you to change that. And I'd like you to add 3 minutes when it's fair. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Frank Ager from the Cascades. I urge the council to reject the certification of the PEIR and the housing element. And if you can't reject it, at least amend it to protect our town. Public agencies use programmatic environmental impact reports to hide real facts from the public they serve. On November 10th, 2023, I commented on the insufficiency of Fairfax's DPEIR and pointed out errors. Diet and Basha never included in their DPEIR that the Sir Francis Drake Broadway and Bolinas Road corridors will now be riddled with developments of 20 to 60 units per acre for HO-B and HO-A parcels. And they never told you that they were going to allow cluster multi-million-dollar mansions that are upland residential zoned and hill area parcels to save open space. Open space that we saved 50 years ago. And they never provided any visuals for the 5 to 7 story residential tower that's going to be located at School Street Plaza. The County of Marin was Fairfax's 1964 consultant to prepare a new general plan and zoning ordinance. We based Fairfax's UR10 zoning on the county's A60 zoning. Marin County does not allow cluster zoning in our A zones. Can the last place last? Why A60 zoning matters. The Environmental Action Committee of West Marin has a blog on that. The Sonoma Development Center is under attack in a lawsuit, and it's a plan and the EIR that Diet and Basha prepared for the county of Sonoma. Includes a number of environmental groups, and the Sierra Club is participating. So you need to take a look at that lawsuit up there in Sonoma and understand what's going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker. I think we had another speaker.
Mark Bell, Fairfax. I'd like to point out that you started off saying that you're looking at adopting these documents, but also that there were last-minute changes that were not available to the public, at least not within the required legal window. How is constructing 175 units of School Street Plaza not going to violate the visual character or the quality of public view? Did anyone do core samples? How far down do you have to dig the foundation for 5 stories? If it's only 5 stories, it would obviously be more if it was 7. 40 feet, 50 feet? You think that hillside can take it? You have people camping right next to that, and the hillside's falling down. Who established the visual aesthetic? Who were these paragons of artistic endeavor who know what the visual aesthetic means? Dark sky provisions. So we have new ones added to reduce the visual mass of new structures. What does that mean? You think you can mitigate everything? Are you kidding me? I'd like to also go into this I have more, but I'm sure a lot of it has been covered and you really don't care because you only give us 2 minutes. And I doubt there's going to be enough people on Zoom to make it legal. Topographical reference mapping by the town staff. Well, I remember noise mapping by the town staff, and that was pretty awful. And as far as ridgeline view protections, it says you're not allowing construction in the ridgeline, but then and further down it says you are.
Thank
So
you,
how
Mark.
can you vote for something with no clarity?
Thank you, Mark. Next speaker.
Good evening. Jim Cosgrove. I live up on Bay Road. The first thing.
Bring the mic close to your mouth so we can actually hear you. That'd be
Yes.
great. Thank you so much.
Yes. Jim Cosgrove. I live up on Bay Road. And my question is, this is a huge issue for this town. And I'm just wondering, outside of some of the documents not making its way into the online, why aren't we posting this at a visual place downtown, or are we, where the public can see it? I mean, we have 12, 13 people here. Normally, if this information was out to the public on a board in the town, this place would be packed. So I just think the way we're going about it is that the public is not being exposed to this as much as they should. And the second thing is there was a house down the street up on Bay Road, up on a ridgeline. It was a 3,300 square foot house. It was a disaster. It was a disaster, the construction. It caused damage to one of my retaining walls. They had to do $60,000 in road repair for 60 feet. My point is, you have unmaintained roads. Who's going to do the assessment? Fairfax does not do road assessments. San Anselmo does, San Rafael does. And these cement trucks come in with 65,000 pounds. Who's going to manage this process? Who's going to pay for it? The town's going to pay for it. So hopefully it's going to be reflected in the building codes. Hopefully it's going to be reflected in the planning. Mark Lockerbie is a great guy. But the problem is that this is not maintained. These construction companies will be cut loose with these huge trucks coming in on these unmaintained roads. You have to do an assessment. So, I mean, those are just a couple of things. And I think just with there's no one here, and I don't understand what is the problem. I know there has to be 2 minutes, but what is the problem with people having a chance to express? I think everyone's pretty reasonable, fired up, I can tell. But it's reasonable that people can speak for an extra minute on an issue that's going to impact the town.
Thank you. Thank you. Other speakers in the room? Thank you very much. Rick?
Hi, Rick Hamer, School Street Plaza, downtown Fairfax. My household lives at School Street Plaza. We are a good example of what this type of housing would provide, in that I work out of home and my other half walks a block to be one of our workforce housing. So I really support the idea that this is one of the only ways this WHO A and WHO B overlay, which is considering replacing a car wash and other underutilized sites by taking advantage of land residual value, which can only be made viable for affordable housing by having density bonuses and things like that. I have one question for the consultant, if I hope I will answer this, is that
we'll ask them to answer questions later.
this will be a question that I hope people answer. Okay. Is if 165 eligible parcels for under SB 9 decided to line up outside Town Hall tomorrow and seek permits to divide their properties, thereby creating 490 new dwelling units, eligible dwelling units for zoning, would that negate what we need to do with our housing element? The rest of my time I want to spend to continue what Sierra was saying. And yes, I was at the town council meetings 20 years or so back now, when the previous owner traded his building rights for up top for what he built below and at Sir Francis Drake above the 7-Eleven. He agreed to all future development rights to be topped out top being denied permanently in exchange for building homes below. Why is that not agreement not being honored? How can there be any trust? There is certainly zero public transportation
Rick.
there.
Other speakers in the room? Seeing none, we'll go to Zoom.
The first speaker on Zoom is Barbara Petty, followed by Deborah Benson. Barbara, you're unmuted now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I live at 272 Forest Avenue, which is adjacent to the two town-owned properties. First of all, I wanted to say in public, and I did say this in email in August, that those parcels were purchased for open space by prior councils. And so I believe that you all know that. And so I don't understand how you can just change the will of the prior council and the will of the people, that those town properties were purchased for open space. So I don't really think they should legally be in inventory. And I know none of my neighbors know anything about this. I sent an email back in August, but I've never been told about any of the other procedures. So that's really not equitable to all of us, where a potential building site could really impact all of us. Whether it happens or not, we're going to have to disclose that when we sell our house, that potentially a 10-unit parcel could be built. And as somebody else said, I think Matthew Fastberg said, if you guys would come out and look at Forest Avenue, which by the way has had landslides on it up and down. And I know you guys know this because you just had to fork out a bunch of money for that major landslide a few years ago. It's really not the place to build 10 units. And this doesn't count even the evacuation issue. Sir Francis Drake is one thing, but Forest Avenue is worse. It's basically a one lane road. We'll never get out if we have more building on this. So I would really like you to consider taking these off of the inventory. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Deborah Benson, followed by Lynn. Deborah, you're unmuted now.
Hi, Deborah Benson, Cascade Drive, Fairfax. A lot to say. Forest Avenue is kind of falling down. It did fall down at one point, resulting in a lawsuit between the town and a resident. I'm up there looking at trees with the tree committee. It's being patched, different levels. Building more up there is ridiculous. In 2007, my girl graduated from Drake. A light pole was hit by a car at graduation time. Sir Francis Drake was closed off. Center Boulevard and all the surrounding neighborhoods turned into a parking lot. 2 hours to clear it up. God forbid we have a fire. The EIR doesn't really address the real numbers in regards to inclusionary housing and affordable housing. The percentage included in the 406 is 20% inclusionary. 20 affordable units be low market rate or added for every 80 market rate. The highest percentage of affordable likely to be added is 20%. Makes it really difficult for the city to reach the 306 units in this category. At 20% inclusionary to arrive at the requisite 306 affordable units, Fairfax will actually need to build 1,530 units. 1224 market rate and 306 affordable. The EIR doesn't address this. I urge you guys to go look at some of the town council meeting videos from 2016, 2017, where we all had 3 minutes and we were acting as a community, where we were not at odds with each other, where we were not treating each other with enmity. We had issues that we disagreed on, but we were kind, we were inclusionary, and I am so ashamed of you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
The next speaker is Lynn, followed by Dave Eng. Lynn, you're unmuted now.
Hi, I want to say Frank Egger is a town hero, and I wish you guys would acknowledge that. You seem to never do that. It's bothersome. Can we get rid of the bell and have chimes? I have a question about the workforce housing, the who manages that? It says, I think, in people that work in Fairfax or Marin County. What if they end up moving to the city? Do people have to reapply every 6 months, or how do they prove to you that they still live here? And wouldn't it make sense that they only be people that live and work in Fairfax and they don't have cars? If that's the whole point of cutting down the gas and people moving around, you can't get a bus out of this town when you want it. The other thing is, isn't the lodge at 1573 a historical building? Because it was built in 1906. So that's something. I think we need to put on the ballot about the 2-minute rule. It should be 3 minutes. I think that's something the people need to vote for. And then actions speak louder than words when it comes to the evacuation plan. I've read all of the plans. None of them are true. They're not true until we actually have town evacuation drills, people in their cars, on their bikes, picking up kids, trying to get out of this town at the same time. And until that actually happens and you take it seriously, that we have serious fire problems, and God forbid it's closed at San Geronimo and you can't go that way, and people from Woodacre have to come through Fairfax, I won't believe it. We do not have a drill. Words, actions speak louder than words. It's a fact. And that's it. And I can't believe you guys don't implement and enforce having evacuation. I keep saying it. 3 hours, like 3 a.m, 5, 6, 8. People trying to pick up their kids. What are you going to do? You can't get out.
Thank you, Lynn.
The next speaker is Dave Eng, followed by Pamela Miggs. Dave, you're unmuted now. You might have to unmute your own microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My name is Dave Hang. This is my first, I guess, in a meeting. I live at 253 Forest Avenue, which is just above those 10 units that are being proposed. Actually, I don't mind if everything's nicely done. All I want is for you guys to come over, take a look at the road, see what you think. Part of the road is sinking down, and when I walk my dog every day through that area, I'm kind of sometimes worried. So I know that I voted for you guys, you represent me, and I want those planners to come, take a look at the area, what their opinion is. Can this area, those 2 lots, have 10 units? I don't know how many people are going to live on each unit, but just make an educated guess or an educated evaluation. I guess that's a better word. And that's all I want you guys to consider. I personally, I don't think it's a viable 2 sites for all those units, unless you can find a way to have access from Marine Town and Center. But sounds to me that you guys having some problems with that owner down there, which I guess it's politics, right? Anyway, I have 4 seconds, and thank you for listening to me. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
The next
speaker. I'm sorry.
Is Pamela Miggs, followed by Michael Sexton. Pam, you're unmuted now.
Hello, good evening, everyone. First off, when I looked at the agenda tonight, I saw there were 3 or 4 sections that said revised, but then when I clicked on it, it did not show the revised, what was revised. So I couldn't figure it out. I mean, I could have missed something. I'm pretty sick today. Secondly, I want to talk about the VMT and transportation. About 20 years ago, when we were working on the general plan, it came up for the town of Fairfax to get a small vehicle to take a lot of us elders down to appointments back and forth. It was supported, but it's never blossomed. So that might be a consideration, because I think there's 30% of us are over 65 in the town. And there's a lack of services in this town. So that's another reason why we're going back and forth. Secondly, I wanted to say on the land use element about the conservation easement, that really needs to be addressed carefully and really put into final stages before we lose properties to be sold and developed. That is what's happening in other towns. They are using conservation easements. And then last, we're all trying to do the best for the town, and I think we all mean well, but I would really ask that we all try to take care of each other as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela.
The next speaker is Michael Sexton, followed by Mark. Michael, you're unmuted now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Town Council. It's Michael Sexton at 20 Chester. This meeting is another example of not listening to the very insightful comments of all the in-person commentators. Sierra, Michael McIntosh, Todd, Frank Eggers, and all the others have had great comments that reflect both the long-term knowledge and practical experience. They have highlighted important issues that the town and the planners have overlooked repeatedly and have not addressed sufficiently. I urge you to consider their comments and their very negative views of the CIR. I suggest that before you accept this, you listen again, but this time take action to remedy these residents' concerns. Some of the elements proposed in EIR are insane. The 10 units on the parcels up in Forest, the 175 at School Street, the inability to address the Marin Town and Country Club property, and of course the crazy owners' extra rent control regulations that factor into the housing element. All these demonstrate your inadequacy in listening to the residents' concerns. I urge you not to blow off the concerns like you've done in almost every other meeting where they have spoken. The citizens of Fairfax look forward to having their concerns addressed and having the makeup of the new town council this November finally reflect the desires of their citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, thank you. Next speaker.
The next speaker is Mark, followed by Jenny Silva. Mark, you're unmuted now.
Hello, this is Mark Alessino from 186 Forest Avenue. I just wanted to comment on specifically today on Forest Avenue. I wasn't even aware that Forest Avenue was added till a neighbor sent something out. Don't know when it was added, and I was also wondering, like, if Forest Avenue had as much consideration through public comment and other studies as well. Seems like there was pretty comprehensive studies about other locations, and I didn't hear anything about Forest Avenue specifically. Also, it was a traffic study back, it was a while ago, about 15 years ago. My wife and I and a few others, about 50 of us, went down to town council, and we had Forest Avenue limited on traffic because it was unsafe, and the parking hazards and the car hazards and the traffic hazards up here. Wondering if that was considered too. And a few people mentioned the landslide issues. There seems to be a potential landslide right where that development is, where actually I tripped the other day going into town, walking on that street, because it looks pretty major to me, like something's going to happen and it should be fixed. And then also the last thing is an evacuation of Forest Avenue. We've had evacuation drills on Forest Avenue. It's been pretty challenging to get out of here when we all leave at the same time, let alone Center Boulevard being completely clogged when you get down there off of Forest Avenue. So just I want to know why Forest Avenue has just been added. It seems to be all of a sudden to me. And if there's considerations for Forest Avenue compared to the rest of the properties that were examined. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Jenny Silva, followed by Carmela Davis. Jenny, you're unmuted now.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jenny Silva, and I'm the board chair for the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative. And first of all, I just want to commend the town of Fairfax, the staff, and the council on the significant progress that has been made on the housing element. As you are aware, we are in a housing crisis, and this is a statewide crisis, and every community, including Fairfax, needs to contribute to solving it. And this housing element draft looks like a true effort to address it. We are really pleased to hear that you have been talking to the developer of School Street and that you're providing the density needed to make the project viable. This site is absolutely critical for Fairfax to meet its RHNA. And it's a good site for housing, walkable to downtown, to services. It supports a low car dependent lifestyle, which is good for health, emissions, pollution, and traffic condition. Infill housing is an important strategy for Marin to embrace to create the housing it needs while protecting the environment. And the school site, plaza site, is especially important because Fairfax is being very aggressive in its projections for ADUs. From what I've seen in other housing elements, I'd be surprised if HCD accepts the level of increase that you're projecting. And it's certainly a big risk in getting the housing element approved. And with that, you really need every other unit that you have in there. And then lastly, I just want to state there have been many comments from the community about landslide risk, traffic, evacuation, the overall size and massing of the developments. And I just want to say these issues are tough, and they're issues that are that communities are grappling with. But they're issues that every community in Marin and actually throughout California is grappling with. And there are ways to address all of these things. There's a lot that we can learn from other communities, and I'm confident Fairfax can too. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next speaker is Carmela Davis, and you're unmuted now.
Hello, I'd like to thank you for your time and commend you all for the efforts that you have made today. My name is Carmela Davis, and I grew up here in Marin. I'm recently a college graduate, and I would really like to see Marin continue to build more housing so that one day people like me would be able to move back. As of right now, there is no affordable housing for someone in my similar position, and same goes for teachers and public servants who work in Marin. We are in a housing crisis, and Fairfax has a really strong attempt to help address this with its current housing element, retaining the units that it has right now. The School Street Plaza site is one that I encourage you to keep in the housing element as you move to approve it. This site is a previously developed property, so the environmental impact of the development would be reduced since it's not resorting to greenfill. I approve of the height and density, and it would ensure the ability to increase the number of housing units in Fairfax in order to meet the RHNA goal. It's in a good location, it's downtown, it's accessible to restaurants and parks and shops. This would help increase less car dependency and would be increasing the use of the shops downtown and creating a community of people that we all know and love. So I want to thank you for your consideration and strongly suggest you to include School Street Plaza as you approve this housing element.
Thank you.
Sorry. I see no further raised hands on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. No, I'll bring it back. I want to just, there were a couple of questions raised that, I'm sorry, what, Michelle?
Are you closing the?
Oh, I'm closing the
hearing?
public hearing. So a couple of questions. Thank you, Michelle. Did all the supplements get posted?
Yes, all the supplements are posted. They were posted as soon as they were received and prior to my notifying the council that there were supplements. They're all available online, and we had a hard copy at the front counter of Town Hall, and there's a hard copy in the back of the room.
Thank you. I think Rick Hamer asked a question about SB 9, and I'm not sure the question was something like if 160 parcels showed up, would this negate? But I thought when we did our analysis, we didn't think that SB 9 really applied to any parcels or very few. So Andrew, could you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that is correct. It doesn't appear that there's a lot of potential for SB 9 in Fairfax because of the extent of environmental constraints. The law is written to facilitate that type of lot split and development on relatively flatter parcels that are free from environmental constraints. But I think maybe the principle in the question, I could speak to that.
All right.
I think what the commenter was asking is, let me explain that the housing element is primarily a projection. It identifies the sites that seem to meet the eligibility criteria established by the state best. And so it's essentially the town of Fairfax's best estimate of where development is most likely to occur. And that's what goes into the housing element. Then after adoption, we move to the implementation phase, and things may or may not, produce as identified in the housing element. But any housing unit that the town issues a permit for gets counted towards the RHNA. And so I think the principle of the concept behind the question is, well, what if 490 ADUs get built? Well, yes, all of them would count. If the town issues 490 ADU permits, then you could meet all of your RHNA ostensibly through ADUs if they met the affordability requirements. I think that's what the commenter was asking. We're not. There's no guarantee or requirement that all of the sites in the housing element inventory get built exactly as it's proposed. What's in the housing element is a projection of what seems most realistic and most likely based on the evidence identified. But what actually gets permitted is what counts towards your RHNA through the 8-year period, if that makes sense.
Okay, and another commenter didn't raise this as a question, but raised a concern about how you calculated the number of ADUs. And so the first part of that is they're not site specific, but maybe you could explain, right now our average is 11 per year. And why don't you explain how we came to 20? I understand there's guidelines through HCD, but could you explain that more clearly?
Sure. So you are correct. The state has issued guidance for how to project the number of ADUs, and the guidance, actually, it's the law that says since 2008, you look at the annual number of construction permits issued since 2018, and then you can take, at a minimum, you can take that annual average and apply it for the 8 years over the planning period. In Fairfax's case, the calculations that we did at the time the housing element was published were an average of 11 per year. So at a minimum, Fairfax can project 88 over the planning period. However, the action plan, Chapter 4, includes a very robust suite of incentives and programs to raise awareness and facilitate the development of ADUs and junior ADUs. And there's a significant potential for that type of housing here in Fairfax, given the age of the population, the size of parcels. There's really a significant potential. So that potential, that need, coupled with this robust suite of programs, on that basis, we're projecting 20 per year. So I think that answers the question.
And I believe, okay, so first, before we do that, I'm trying to get to respond to questions that were raised during the public
About
hearing.
the ADU though, can I just?
Okay, let me just add one piece to that. And at least I believe our indications from housing community development that they're not questioning what we've projected, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Hellman, but let's just keep it so we can respond to
Yeah,
questions.
no,
that
I
were
had
raised.
a very relevant, because I shared the concern, frankly, that the, over 100% production is high. But Jeff, you shared with me a county program that's not actually in the housing element, like listed as a program, but something that we might be able to take advantage of down the line. And I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, there's a and I don't know what number it is in the housing element, but there's a strongly correlated potential activity that could occur in the county, where there's a Sonoma Napa collaborative related to the production of ADUs. And it's kind of like a place where people can go to talk to, potentially get connected with developers, get sample floor plans, etc. And Marin County collectively, as jurisdictions, were contemplating potentially joining that collaborative. So that would give us like very low cost access to ADU, floor plans, developers, that type of thing, where homeowners could interact directly with those types of folks.
Thank
So
you.
anyway,
Thank you. And I believe the last question that was raised was brought up about the workforce housing and how do you ensure that people are part of workforce housing? And I don't think that's really part of the housing element. The idea is to build housing that teachers, et cetera, could potentially occupy, but that could change over time. Maybe you want to expand on that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think so fair housing law, state fair housing law says that you wouldn't be able to limit it only to people who live in Fairfax. There has to be fair access to housing, even for people who are not here. However, it is most likely that people would want, if they can find an affordable house near where they work, that's where they're going to choose to live. So by creating more affordable housing locally, you're going to create more opportunities who already work for people who already work in the town or in adjacent jurisdictions to live here. So it seems like the most people who would be interested in the housing are people who already work here or live here.
Okay, and just one follow-up question. So, the fact that the housing might be a little more affordable is, let's say some tech person came into town and thought, why don't I buy that? That's cheap. I could buy 20 of those. How do we ensure that initially we're actually capturing the workforce rather than somebody who's just capitalizing on a more affordable situation?
Yeah, so the units, when we talk about deed restriction, they're deed restricting a certain percentage of the units for households that make less than 80% of the countywide area median income.
Okay, well,
deed restrictions would be the way. People would need to demonstrate their income in order to qualify for that subsidized housing.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. The other question that came up a lot was really the Forest Avenue parcels, and that came up from several folks. And I know I had something to do with choosing those, but as you hear those questions, and I'm not talking about evacuation or things like that, but the buildability of that site, initially when it was proposed, when we looked at it, we saw it was quite steep and would be difficult. So I'm just wondering the value of those parcels. I know it's also paired with the idea of working with an affordable housing developer, but I'm just wondering, there's 10 units there. Is there value to continuing to include those, given that they may be very difficult to build on and it might not be attractive for affordable housing developer because of the expenses? So I'm just wondering the value of those parcels. And I should have asked this earlier.
Yeah, if you look at the table, in chapter 3, it's table 3.7, the inventory summary. You can see that there is a buffer on the low and very low category of about.
Okay, so there's a lot of paper with a
Which
lot of
exhibit?
people.
I'm sorry. In the housing element self, volume 1.
Okay,
on
so
page 320.
It's the skinny one.
The skinny one. The skinny one on page 320.
It's volume 1,
Volume
hearing
1.
draft, page
320 at the bottom. There's a table called 3.7, the site's inventory. It's a summary of the
I
inventory.
see page 320. I don't find 3-20. Okay, I'm
Yep.
just trying to also, it's not just for me, it's
For
for
people at
people that
home.
might want to look at what's out there. Okay. So there is a buffer.
There's a buffer of 43 units. And the 10 units at Forest Avenue are contributing to that buffer. So if you were, for example, to take the Forest Avenue sites off, then your buffer gets smaller, right? 33, which is just about 10% of the it's a little more than 10% of the RENA allocation. But then, as Councilmember Hellman has pointed out, we have a pretty robust projection for ADUs, and if those don't all develop at the affordability assumed, then you're eating into the buffer. And
Okay.
so what I'm saying is there is a buffer of 43 units. If you took out the 10 at Forest Avenue, you would still have a decent buffer, but the more units you start taking out, if things don't materialize as envisioned in the housing element, then you run the risk of having to scramble to rezone sites partway through the 8-year planning period in order to make sure that the zoning map always has that capacity to meet RENA.
Okay, and thanks for that explanation. And the other piece of it is, I believe it's tied to a specific program in the action plan. So
Correct.
there is that. Okay, well, thank you. Did you have something to add on that?
I didn't totally track all of that. Sorry.
So it's under
the 43 is where those are falling in, those 10. Okay, so that would bring it down to 33, and it would take the buffer down to 98. And at the buffer at 108, that's currently a 22% buffer. So do you know what, can you do math on the fly?
Yeah.
What 98 would constitute in terms of buffer?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. So the buffer overall is 22%. So if you're taking off 10 units, it's probably about 21.5% or something like that. But the real key in what he's pointing out is that your buffer in the low, very low. And so I think it's a little different than the overall buffer, which seems to be sort of not consequential. But I just wanted to ask those questions because there were so many questions surrounding those. So why don't we, I don't think there was, did Jeff?
Oh, can I say one more thing on
Yeah.
the Forest Avenue? So, and I think that is particularly an important site just because there is a program linked to it.
Right.
And so that would make it more likely to develop. But also if you don't have those units listed and you have a program, you would have a program without a relationship.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking is the program connection. And all right, well, let's bring it to council members for deliberation. And I don't know if someone wants, Councilmember Ackerman.
A question on the Forest Avenue site, and this could apply to other sites as well. You had mentioned earlier that we're considering a programmatic EIR tonight, but there could be environmental studies required for individual projects in the future that would look at things like landslide issues or evacuation issues or road conditions. So those are still in the future for some of these sites.
Yes,
it's hard to
that's
predict
correct.
what they would be or how they would play out, but those are still to be considered.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then earlier you had helpfully pointed out that if, and in response to Rick Hamer's question, if there were to be other opportunities, and I'm just thinking in particular about if there were to be, we can't include the Town and Country Club right now because we can't rezone it. That would have to be done by a vote of the people, and that's not even on the ballot at this point. But if during the planning period that were to occur, then development on that property could offset some of these other sites and still keep us within the requirements of the
Absolutely
state.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything that gets permitted within the period counts towards the RENA, whether it's on the sites map or not.
Okay, and just to point out, there's nothing that precludes a citizens ballot initiative similar to what we've seen with the rent stabilization initiative. So should there be interest with citizens, they could certainly take that up. Other points of deliberation from council members? I see Councilmember Cutrano.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I had a couple quick questions. One is related to comments, and then another one, Forest Avenue is just going to be like the big point of discussion. Yeah. So related to public comment, in an urging of us to reject the certification or to do something to further protect the town. I was curious, there was a mention of the 20 to 60 dwelling units per acre that was kind of like this like upper range that was just like dropped in the comment. And I was wondering if you could speak to the number of dwelling units per acre that are contemplated. And because I was under the assumption that generally it's this 20 dwelling units per acre is what we're contemplating.
I think that may have to do with the workforce housing overlay. I think as part of that workforce housing overlay, and again, the zoning amendments are still, they're only going for a study session tomorrow, so still in draft form. But as proposed, they provide a sliding scale so that a project could get more density if they make a higher commitment to affordability. So, for example, at I think I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but at a 20% a commitment to make 20% of the units affordable to lower income households, they would get 40 dwelling units per acre. But if they made a commitment to 25%, they would get 45 dwelling units per acre. So there's a scale that it's a trade-off, right? If the property owner or the developer makes a commitment to make a higher percentage available to at affordable prices, then they would get bonus density. It mirrors state density bonus law, the structure that's in these proposed amendments.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, I think sounds like that's forthcoming at Planning Commission discussions, but that's going to be helpful to rehash again and again so people understand the way that those calculations work out. Other point I wanted to ask about was there's a question about mansions on the ridge lines or things like that. And in 2019, there was an ordinance that prior to me being on the council was designed to limit the square footage of new homes in Fairfax. And I'm curious, nothing in this seeks to undermine or it doesn't nullify the prior ordinances that were designed to limit the size of homes in Fairfax moving forward, correct?
That is correct. In fact, the draft of the low impact clustered standards mirrors that, the size requirements that are in that ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you. The other thing that that stood out to me regarding the Forest Avenue site in particular, had a question. If we reduce the buffer further and further, say start picking and choosing parcels to remove at this stage, how do you see that affecting the state's certification of the housing element? Are they, as the buffer gets smaller, my assumption would be they become increasingly skeptical of the viability of the plan, but I just wanted to confirm that before deciding on anything.
Yes, that is true. The state has already had a first look at the document, and they've given feedback on the basis of what's in there now. If we go changing the parameters, they might change their opinion. What the state is looking for in their review is that communities are not putting too many eggs in the same basket. They really like to see a variety of different strategies for meeting the RHNA. So, ADUs and junior ADUs, workforce housing, a variety of different types. In case any one thing doesn't pan out as expected, their HCD looks favorably on a community that take a variety of different strategies to try and meet the RHNA. And so taking out the town-owned forest properties is taking out one of the tools and from their point of view, it might limit or preclude, limit the town's ability to meet its RHNA.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, there are already a lot of like eggs in the basket of a handful of sites as it is to meet the majority of the numbers. And a number of these sites have been on prior housing elements again and again. So I get that sentiment. Just two quick things for my colleagues. One is, as you all recall, at our March meeting of this year, we had our public works director, bring forward, pavement condition index updates for all of our roads. Forest Avenue is broken into 3 different sections on that map. And is, each of those sections have different ratings. Some sections are, middle of the road for Fairfax, which is, fair, but not great, like 55. Where these homes are, just for your information, is I think 65 or about. So it's of the 3 sections of forest, this area is actually the best quality of roadway. Still work to do on the road, obviously, a lot of work to do on all of our roads, but just wanted to call that out. The other thing, I was on the open space committee prior to being on council, and we had reviewed which town-owned parcels fell within and without the priority conservation areas. And it was a project of Jack Judkins, Chris Borgian, and myself trying to figure that out and design a spreadsheet that showed us. And just wanted to say that that was my biggest thing, is like, as an open space committee member, I was trying to figure out which of the town-owned parcels abut open space and which of the town-owned parcels fell within the priority conservation areas, because that was the charge of the open space committee when the general plan was put together. And my understanding is these 2 do not fall within the PCAs, the priority conservation areas, which we were talking about earlier. So I just wanted to call that out as well, just because there was a good amount of work done looking at all of these town-owned parcels prior to the housing element process. These 2 parcels, I know there was a speaker that mentioned that they were something related to open space, but we have a lot of parcels. The town owns a lot of parcels on Forest Avenue. A lot of them are actually like much closer to open space. These are close to Marin Town and Country Club, but there's development on either side of these parcels. And so I don't know the provenance or the history of that acquisition, but it was lower on that list of like, we know for sure these were acquired for open space, and there was good reason because they're up against open space or something like that. These were like a little more, there was a bigger question mark around these particular parcels, which might be the reason why they were suggested in the housing element. I'm not sure how it came about that those 2 were selected, but yeah, I just wanted to provide that information since I had it.
And just to add, so the town owns 52, maybe 53 parcels at this point. And I remember when I was on the open space committee, a former mayor said, one of the ideas is to take what you can get through tax default or donations, because at some point you may trade them for something better in the future. So I don't know why the town owns 52 parcels or 53 now, probably 53, but I think there's kind of a history back there of certain parcels we just caught, or certain parcels the town just kept initially. So thanks for sharing that. That's really good information.
Really
on the
good. Thank you.
PCI, and also just your work on open space. Thanks for sharing that. I saw Vice Mayor Blash had your finger on the button.
Okay. Yeah. So, and I just wanted to put out there that I do walk on Forest a lot, so I kind of understand the concern. It's a very steep street. And I think a lot of us are pretty aware of the conditions on Forest. So I'm happy to have some clarification about the deliberation behind the situation with those parcels. And I did also, just as we get going here, want to thank the staff and consultants for this huge amount of work. I mean, this was a lot of reading. This is a huge amount of work, and I am really impressed by it. I think it's amazing. I also want to thank the Planning Commission for having done such a careful job of reviewing a lot of this. I've watched that meeting like 2 times now, so that was great. And also wanted to note that, I do reports kind of like this for work. So people are doing it under pressure, under deadlines. I think, a number of us have put due diligence in to read these documents and send in, all the little tiny things that we found that could be changed. So I'm really also grateful to my colleagues for, being on the ball about this. Okay, so I did want to just note that I think that a lot of people are really, disappointed that not all of the housing in the housing element is going to be 100% subsidized housing. Like I myself would love to see it all be 100% affordable. That's not what the state says we can do. So I just want to put that out there that I'm getting, comments to that effect. I mean, even if it was 100% affordable, there would still be people who would not want it. So, it's a difficult task. I myself might prefer that the numbers be fewer and that everything be 100% affordable. But again, that's not what's before us from the state. There are studies that say that creating additional housing, even if it isn't 100% affordable, does actually loosen up the market and in the long term create more affordability. Some people don't believe that, but that seems to be what some of the studies indicate. So let's see. I did also want to note there were some concerns people have been throwing about these calculations, which, I understand. It's kind of like the calculus is flipped in terms of the amount of affordable we need doesn't seem to correspond to the amount of affordable we can get from the inclusionary percentages. And I know that's a concern to people. And one of the things that we can try to do, although it is difficult in a town with high property values and small properties, very small parcels, is 100% affordable housing like we have at Victory Village or Bennett House. So, if there's any way for us to get more of that, that might help our calculus a little bit. So I just wanted to put out there that not all affordable housing, in fact, most of the affordable housing in the county is the product of 100% affordable nonprofit developed housing, not the result of inclusionary. So just putting that out there, there are other options, although they might be difficult. And I guess one of the things, I wanted to point out is, we might not like everything that we're required to do with this housing element, but I think that not approving it is going to actually be worse than approving it in terms of local control. And so that's a thing I just really want to put out there. Like, we may all have unhappinesses with the way this is laid out. We may agree with some of the public comment that's out there. And at the same time, I think some of the penalties that you've laid out really spell out the fact that if we do not approve this, it may be Sacramento making planning and development decisions in Fairfax instead of Fairfax having any control of it at all. So that does concern me. And I did want to note also that Fairfax, there's some people who said to us, why don't you just, sue the state? I haven't seen any communities have a lot of success with that yet. And I did want to note that Fairfax is a part of the League of California Cities, which does have a strong emphasis on enhancing local control. And so I think that they might be better suited to fighting that battle than individual jurisdictions. So I just wanted to say that I kind of feel like some building is going to happen either way. And the issue is really whether or not we give ourselves more control in the matter or less control. So that's just, and I don't know if there's anything else we can do with our housing element at this late date, but I just wanted to put out there that those are my concerns, is protecting the right of citizens of Fairfax to have some say over local planning and development decisions rather than no say. And I guess that's all I'm going to say for now.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamlin. No, well, a couple of things. I do want to thank staff and Diet Bhatia for all the work, and our clerks for getting these things posted and the constant supplements. It was quite a lot of reading, and I devoted every day 4 hours or more every day to try to get through this package. And then when that findings of fact came out last night, I almost cried, but I did buckle down and read it and pointed out some areas I had questions, as well as a few of the areas that, there were a couple little changes needed. I think Vice Mayor Blash pointed out some of the things that we're hearing statewide and in Fairfax. And I just happened to get on the governor's website a few minutes before I left and saw that the AG's office is intervening in a case against La Cañada Flint Ridge for refusing a builder's remedy, where the developer is suing La Cañada Flint Ridge, and the state is asking to intervene to go against that city. A few months ago, I saw that HCD and the AG's office went after Coronado for basically saying, we're not doing this housing element. So the state has taken control, and there will be no decisions that can be made by Coronado until they have a compliant housing element. They're on a schedule by the state to complete that in April of next year. They cannot refuse any development during that time. And so I want to say that I'm putting a line in the sand. I think that I was mayor for the last housing element, and we were able to build Victory Village. We didn't do much more. And I will also say 100% affordable. There were folks in town that were against 100% affordable for older adults, many were disabled, some chronically homeless. And I was frankly shocked. What's wrong with this picture? And I live next door to it. People who would be homeless right now are living there, and it's a beautiful location, and people have a safe place to live, and it's all Section 8. So there was also a former mayor trying to put a referendum against that development. So not everybody is even for affordable housing. I think we have a good mix here. And I think, you know, despite the fact that these are big numbers, I think we have struck that balance. It's not perfect. It will never be perfect. But in reading the EIR and the housing element, a lot of my questions were answered. And I also watched the Planning Commission live when they did the hearing. And it really helped me to have even a better understanding. I want to thank Councilmember Catrano for partnering with me on the Housing Element Subcommittee. That was fast and furious, but on the good end of that, we had a preview for some of this stuff and also had some options to change some direction. So I feel that I know there's going to be folks that are unhappy, but I think we have struck a balance. And I really like changing direction with Diet and Bhatia, and who I think, even though you don't live here, I think you've gotten a really good feel for Fairfax and the details. And one of the supplements that came out that was some of the pictures of some of the sites, to me, I'm not the greatest at reading maps. And even with those site inventories expanded, they were still small. But I really like seeing the sites, and it helped me have a better understanding. So I think we're at a good point, and I would ask that somebody consider making a motion. And I would tell you that despite the many supplements we have in front of us, the original staff report talks about what the motions are. There are 2 motions, correct? And shall we do them separately, Town Attorney?
Yes, they're 2 different, there's 2 resolutions.
Just look at the front page.
There,
of the
2
staff.
different resolutions.
So 2 different resolutions.
Yeah, and the EIR needs to go first.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The EIR needs to go first.
Needs to go first.
Yeah, I think it's listed here first. So I think Vice Mayor Blash is going to make a motion. I see her finger on the button.
Okay, I'm going to do it. So I'd like to make a motion.
No. Town Attorney, would you respond to that?
No, there shouldn't be.
Okay. Could you go ahead, Vice Mayor Blash?
Okay, I'm going to make a resolution, or I'm going to make a motion to pass a resolution of the Town Council of the Town of Fairfax certifying.
You need to say the name of the
Thank you.
resolution.
Resolution 23-59, a resolution of the Town Council of the Town of Fairfax certifying an environmental impact report and making certain findings as required by the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, in connection with the approval of a general plan amendment adopting an update of the housing element for the period of 2023 through 31.
And you need to add, based on the supplement.
Based on the supplement.
That would be the second supplement. That
I don't think we need to say
replace
that,
yeah.
but thank you.
Based on the correct supplement.
It is the second supplement that
Okay, based on the
replaces the
second
resolution.
All right.
Thank
Based
you.
on the second supplement. Thank you.
Thank you. And are you seconding that motion?
I would second that motion. Yes.
Okay, so we have Vice Mayor Blash made the motion, Councilmember Ackerman seconded. Could you take a roll call vote?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Ackerman,
Yes.
Councilmember Hellman,
Yes.
Councilmember Cutrono,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Blash,
Yes.
Mayor Kohler.
Yes.
All ayes, motion passes.
Okay, we need a motion for the second. Would you like to do that, Vice Mayor Blash?
Yes, so I'm going to make a motion for resolution 23-60, a resolution of the Town Council of the Town of Fairfax adopting a general plan amendment to update the housing element for the period of 2023 through 31 and affirmatively furthering fair housing and comply with state housing element law.
Would someone like to second that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, so that was Vice Mayor Blash made the motion and second Councilmember Hellman. Would you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Ackerman,
Yes.
Councilmember Hellman,
Yes.
Councilmember Cutrono,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Blash,
Yes.
and Mayor Kohler.
Yes.
That's ayes all, motion passes.
Okay, with that, I'd like to adjourn the meeting and thank everyone for your patience and
Thank you.
sticking with us. And thank you to our staff for all the hard work. Thank you.
Thank you and happy holidays.